Hey there. Before we begin, you should be in a position that is comfortable to you, and you can let us know in the comments where in the world you are and what is the current time for you. The sun inches over the horizon in 11th century Anatolia, casting long shadows across a landscape that's both a battleground and a bustling marketplace. It's Seljuk Warriors' Day, a day that's packed with traditions, rituals, and just a touch of chaos. You can almost hear the collective rustle of warriors donning their armor and the distant clamor of traders setting up stalls. The air is filled with the smell of roasting lamb and the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil, a scent that's both grounding and invigorating. Now, Anatolia isn't just any patch of earth, it's the geopolitical equivalent of a prime real estate. Sitting at the crossroads of trade routes and military campaigns, it's a place where East meets West, and not always in a friendly handshake. You're in a world where warriors are rock stars, and the stage is a region that's been fought over more times than a family heirloom at a will reading. The Seljuks have carved out a name for themselves, not just with their swords, but with strategic alliances and a keen sense for power plays. So what's up with Warriors' Day? Well, it's not just about flexing military might, although there's plenty of that. It's also a day for honouring the values that knit this society together: bravery, loyalty, and a penchant for the dramatic. Picture a society where warriors are not just fighters, but symbols of social order and cultural identity. They're the ones who defend the realm, expand territories, and, let's face it, look pretty darn cool doing it. But let's get into the nitty-gritty of this morning. As you stretch and shake off the cobwebs of sleep, you notice the stirrings of your community ramping up for the day. The warriors are the main event, sure, but the economic gears of the market are already spinning like a well-oiled machine. Traders and merchants have their own rituals to attend to, laying out their best wares to catch the eye of anyone with a few coins to spare. Spices from the east, silks from the far corners of the empire, and tools that promise to make life just that bit easier. They're all here, vying for your attention and your wallet. This isn't just about commerce in the classic sense, it's a living, breathing example of how economics and war are intertwined. Every sword has to be paid for, every piece of armor crafted by skilled hands, each with its own price tag and a story to tell. The blacksmith down the street might be grumbling about his aching back, but he's also counting his coins, knowing that a good day of selling could mean the difference between a winter of warmth or one of shivering by a dwindling fire. Anatolia's strategic importance can't be overstated. It's like having a front row seat to the greatest show on earth, with the added bonus, or curse, of being in the splash zone. Everyone wants a piece of this place, and why wouldn't they? Control of Anatolia means a gateway to riches and resources galore. It's a pivot point, a place where empires test their mettle and sometimes, quite literally, lose their heads. And there you are, standing in the midst of it all, a cog in the grand machine of Seljuk society. You glance at the warriors, some still bleary-eyed from the previous night's revelries, others already sizing each other up like gladiators in an arena. The morning rituals start with prayers, offerings, and maybe a quick word with the local mullah who blesses the proceedings. It's about connecting with the divine and ensuring that the gods, or at least the local spirits, are on their side. But let's not romanticize it too much. This is a society built on the back of conquest and conflict. The warriors are celebrated, yes, but they're also a grim reminder of the cost of power. For every grand victory, there's a village burned, a family torn apart, land scarred by the trampling of armies. It's a harsh reality that's often glossed over in the tales told by the fireside, but it's there, lurking in the shadows of the morning light. So, as the sun climbs higher and the day unfolds, you find yourself caught in a tapestry of history that's vibrant, complex, and a little bit messy. You're living in a world where strategy isn't just a game of chess, but a daily reality, where every decision can ripple through the ages like a stone tossed into a still pond. And as you weave through the market, dodging the enthusiastic haggles of merchants and the purposeful strides of warriors, you can't help but feel the weight of history on your shoulders, a reminder that you're part of something much bigger than yourself. As you weave through the market, dodging enthusiastic haggles and the purposeful strides of warriors, the buzz of mid-morning activities hits you like a strong cup of Turkish coffee. The Seljuk warriors are gearing up for their daily drills. But this isn't just about physical prowess. No, this is a spectacle. A carefully choreographed ballet of brutality That's both a training exercise and a not-so-subtle reminder of why the Seljuks are the alpha predators of this medieval food chain. In the distance, you hear the sharp clang of swords meeting shields, a sound as familiar here as the call of a street vendor hawking dates. Let's talk about those weapons, shall we? The Seljuks didn't just pick anything shiny and sharp. Their armory was as strategic as their battlefield maneuvers. The bow was their weapon of choice, specifically the composite bow, which was a technological marvel of its time. Made from a blend of wood, horn, and sinew, this bad boy could send an arrow flying over 300 meters. That's more than 3 football fields. And let's not forget the cost. A high-quality bow could set a warrior back a month's wages, easily 150 dirhams, which is no small sum when you consider that most folks were lucky to earn a few dirhams a day. But weaponry is only part of the equation. Armor tells its own story, and it's a tale of economics as much as it is of protection. Chainmail shirts, the medieval equivalent of a bulletproof vest, were the gold standard. We're talking about 20,000 interlocking iron rings, each painstakingly riveted together. It's labor-intensive work, and that's reflected in the price upwards of 200 dirhams, making it a luxury only the well-heeled could afford. For the everyday warrior, scale armor offered a more budget-friendly alternative, though it came at the cost of flexibility and, let's be honest, a bit of dignity. Imagine wearing a suit made of fish scales, not exactly haute couture, even by medieval standards. Now, the Seljuks were famed for their cavalry, and rightly so. These guys didn't just ride horses, they were practically one with their steeds. The cavalry tactics were all about speed and surprise, a blitzkrieg long before the term was coined. Imagine a cloud of dust on the horizon. By the time you see them, it's already too late. Their famous Parthian shot, firing arrows while retreating, was a psychological gut punch as much as a physical one. It was like shouting, "You can't catch me," while delivering a sucker punch to the gut. And here's where we hit a myth head on. The idea of the Seljuk warrior as a paragon of discipline and loyalty. Sure, they were disciplined, but not in the way you might imagine from Hollywood epics. These were men bound not by contracts, but by a complex web of personal loyalty and honor. The reality? Loyalty was a currency as fluid as the Tigris after a storm. A warrior's allegiance could shift faster than you can say power play, especially if a rival leader offered a better deal, more gold, more land, or simply more glory. It's a sobering reminder that loyalty, much like love, is often conditional. And speaking of leaders, the Seljuk sultans weren't just military commanders, they were political jugglers on a unicycle, balancing tribal loyalties, regional politics, and the ever-looming threat of Byzantine ambitions. They were the glue holding this patchwork empire together, but even the strongest glue has its limits. A savvy sultan knew that keeping his warriors happy was as crucial as winning battles. After all, a well-fed, well-paid army was far less likely to stab you in the back, literally and figuratively. The drills continue, a dance of strategy and strength, with each warrior vying to catch the eye of the commanders, perhaps hoping for a promotion or at least a nod of approval. It's a testosterone-fueled spectacle, but also a reminder of the ever-present undercurrent of ambition and rivalry. Every warrior here dreams of glory, of carving his name into the annals of history. But the harsh truth is that history is a fickle mistress, often remembering only the victors or the exceptionally lucky. As the sun climbs higher, casting a golden glow over the dusty drill fields, you can't help but marvel at the complexity of it all. This isn't just a military exercise, it's a microcosm of Seljuk society, a society that's as much about power and politics as it is about swords and shields. The warriors may be the stars of this show, but they're also part of a much larger narrative, a narrative where economics, ambition, and strategy intertwine like threads in a tapestry, each one essential to the whole, yet always at risk of unraveling. So, as the day progresses and the drills wind down, remember this: behind every gleaming sword and polished shield is a story of human endeavor, of struggle and sacrifice, of dreams and disappointments. It's a world where the past is ever present, casting its long shadow over the present and future alike. And as you stand there, a spectator to this grand historical pageant, you can't help but feel the weight of it all, a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and battles, but a living, breathing entity, shaping and reshaping the world in ways both grand and subtle. As the dust from the drills settles and the sun reaches its zenith, you're about to witness a transformation. The warriors, having showcased their prowess, now converge for something equally crucial, the midday feast. Now, don't picture some medieval fast food frenzy. This is about as far from a drive-through experience as you can get. It's a blend of necessity, tradition, and, for some, unabashed indulgence. First up, let's talk about the elite gatherings. You know, the ones that would make even the most extravagant influencers green with envy. Picture long tables groaning under the weight of roasted lamb, piles of rice cooked with saffron, each grain worth more than a soldier's daily wage, and platters of fresh fruit imported from distant lands. Pomegranates, figs, and grapes, all arranged with the kind of aesthetic that would do a modern-day Instagram feed proud. But here's where we peel back the layers of myth. These feasts were not just about gluttony, they were a carefully curated display of wealth and power. The elite used these events to reinforce social hierarchies, remind everyone of their place, and, of course, to subtly, or not so subtly, flaunt their connections and influence. A seat at the table wasn't just a chance to fill your belly, it was a ticket to the inner circle, a place where decisions were made over goblets of wine and plates of the finest cuts of meat. Meanwhile, the rank-and-file soldiers are having their own version of a feast, which is more bring-your-own-bowl than silver platter service. Their meals are communal, centered around hearty stews that could stretch to feed a small army, literally. Ingredients like lentils, barley, and whatever vegetables could be foraged or traded were staples. Bread was the real MVP here, often baked in large communal ovens and shared among the troops. It's a bit like a medieval potluck, minus the awkward small talk and questionable casseroles. Feeding a large force is no small feat, and the logistics are worthy of a tactical manual of their own. Picture supply lines snaking across the landscape, ensuring that every warrior, from the most grizzled veteran to the fresh-faced recruit, gets his share. This is where the true genius of the Seljuk organizers shines. They didn't just rely on local resources, they had networks, an early version of supply chains, ensuring that even in the midst of a campaign, the troops wouldn't be gnawing on their leather boots for sustenance. And let's not forget the role of drink in these gatherings. Water was a practical necessity, but let's be honest, it's hardly the beverage of choice for a warrior looking to unwind. Wine was the preferred tipple, a heady mix that could make even the dreariest encampment feel a touch more civilized. For the elites, the wine flowed freely, imported from the vineyards of Persia or beyond, each sip a reminder of the wealth and trade connections that underpinned their power. But here's a twist in the tale. Storytelling and music were the real lifeblood of these gatherings. You see, the Seljuks knew that morale wasn't just about a full belly, it was about feeding the soul. Music, with its haunting melodies carried by instruments like the oud and the dulcimer, filled the air, weaving an auditory tapestry that connected warriors to their cultural roots. Bards and storytellers were the rock stars of the day, spinning tales of legendary battles, heroes of yore, and, occasionally, the odd ghost story to keep everyone on their toes. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were cultural glue, reinforcing the values that held this society together. Bravery, loyalty, the triumph of the underdog. These themes resonated deeply, serving as both inspiration and a reminder of what was at stake. They were the Netflix of their day, binge-worthy sagas that kept everyone captivated and, crucially, reminded them of their shared identity and purpose. And let's not kid ourselves, these tales weren't always factual. In fact, they often veered into the realm of myth, embellishing deeds and elevating mere mortals to near-divine status. But even here, there's a lesson one that speaks to the human need for heroes and narratives that transcend the mundane grind of daily life. The stories served as a balm, a way to escape reality for a while, even as they subtly reinforced the societal norms and expectations. Yet, let's not romanticize it too much. Beneath the layers of psalm and story lies a harsh reality. For every tale of heroism, there's an unspoken counterpart. The soldiers who didn't return, the battles that ended in defeat, the costs of an empire's ambitions. The feasts and festivities are a temporary escape, but the reality of life on the march is never far off. It's a world where laughter and camaraderie mask the ever-present spectre of conflict and loss. As the sun begins to dip, casting long shadows over the encampment, the atmosphere shifts once more. The warriors, bellies full and spirits lifted, begin to disperse. Some linger, drawn into small groups where the evening's entertainment continues in less formal settings. Others retire, seeking respite and sleep before the next day's challenges. The feast has served its purpose, a reminder that even in the harshest of times, there's room for celebration and community. So as you stand on the periphery, a witness to this tapestry of history, it's clear that the Seljuk way of life was a complex dance of power, tradition, and survival. The feasts are but one thread in a much larger narrative, a narrative that continues to unfold with each passing day. And as the night settles in, a cloak of darkness over the camp, it's a reminder that history is never truly still. It's a living, breathing entity, shaped by those who dare to live it. As the camp settles into a post-feast calm, the afternoon sun casts its warm golden glow over the fields, setting the stage for the next act in this grand Seljuk drama, the competitions. Now, we're not talking about your average medieval pastime of peasants tossing cabbages or knights jousting for a fair maiden's favour. No, the Seljuks had a flair for the dramatic and a keen eye on practicality. So, what better way to prep for war than to turn military drills into competitive sports? Let's start with archery, a skill that's as much about art as it is about precision. Picture a lineup of warriors, each with a composite bow in hand, arrows poised like hawks ready to strike. And these aren't just any arrows, they're expertly crafted missiles designed to fly true and fast. The archers face targets set at varying distances, a challenge that's about as easy as threading a needle while riding a galloping horse. But for a Seljuk warrior, hitting a target 200 meters away is just another day at the office. Now, these archery competitions are more than just a showcase of skill. They double as military training. The Seljuks understood that a well-trained archer could change the tide of battle faster than you can say, incoming. Not to mention, the bow was a democratizing weapon of sorts. It didn't matter if you were the Sultan's cousin or a lowly foot soldier. If you could nail that bullseye, you were a rock star, at least for the afternoon. But let's not gloss over the economics of it all. A decent bow could cost a small fortune, 150 dirhams or more, remember? And each arrow, with its metal tip and feathered shaft, wasn't exactly cheap either. This wasn't just about showing off, it was an investment in the empire's future. Each arrow that flew true was a reminder of the wealth and resources funneled into this military machine. Next up on the agenda is horsemanship, a spectacle that's part ballet, part battlefield rehearsal. The Seljuks didn't just ride horses, they practically waltzed with them. Imagine rows of cavalrymen performing intricate maneuvers, their steeds responding to the subtlest shift in weight or touch of the reins. These were the Ferraris of their day fast, agile and expensive to maintain. Breeding and training a top-notch warhorse was a costly affair, often requiring years and a small treasury's worth of gold. The horses themselves were the unsung heroes of the Seljuk conquests. A well-bred horse could turn an average warrior into an unstoppable force, capable of outrunning, outmaneuvering, and outlasting the enemy. The strategic value of cavalry was enormous. In a world where speed and surprise were the keys to victory, a cavalry charge was like unleashing a thunderstorm on an unsuspecting foe. It was the medieval equivalent of a blitzkrieg, a fast, overwhelming attack that left enemies reeling. But here's where we peel back the romantic veneer. The image of the noble warrior and his loyal steed is a compelling one, sure, but the reality was often less glamorous. Horses were as high maintenance as they come, needing constant care, feeding, and, let's face it, a whole lot of poop scooping. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the idea of the warrior ethos. Yes, these men were brave and skilled, but they were also human-prone to rivalries, jealousies, and opportunism. Loyalty was a fluid concept. If a warrior found a better offer from a rival leader, his allegiance could shift quicker than a horse could bolt. And speaking of internal conflicts, let's not pretend the Seljuk Empire was a monolithic block of unity and harmony. It was more like a medieval soap opera, with intrigue and betrayal lurking around every tent flap. Sultans had to be part warrior, part politician, keeping their coalition of tribes and cities in line. Every military success was a delicate balancing act, ensuring that power struggles didn't turn into full-blown mutinies. But enough with the grim realities, let's return to the competitions. They're more than just a test of skill. They're a vital thread in the fabric of Seljuk society. They reinforced social hierarchies and served as a reminder of what it meant to be part of this empire. Every arrow that struck true, and every horse that responded flawlessly, was a testament to the collective effort and shared identity of the Seljuk people. As the afternoon sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the field, the competitions draw to a close. The victors are celebrated, their prowess acknowledged by cheers and, for some, the promise of rewards and recognition. Yet, even in victory, there's an undercurrent of tension, an understanding that behind each public triumph lies the private reality of ambition, rivalry, and the ever-present spectre of war. So, as the day transitions into evening and the warriors disperse to share tales of their exploits, or perhaps drown their disappointments in wine, you're left with a profound sense of the complexity of it all. Here, in the heart of Anatolia, you're witnessing a world in constant motion, where tradition and innovation, loyalty and ambition, peace and conflict weave together in an intricate dance that's as unpredictable as it is enduring. And as the camp prepares for another night under the Anatolian stars, you're reminded that the Seljuk story is far from over. It's a narrative that continues to unfold, shaped by the forces of history and the very human desires that drive them. So stay tuned, because in this grand historical pageant, the next act is always just around the corner. As the camp prepares for another night under the Anatolian stars, you can almost hear the collective sigh of relief as the day's adrenaline gives way to reflective calm. The warriors, having spent their energy in drills, feasts and competitions, now gather around fires, the flickering flames a backdrop to quiet contemplation and whispered conversations. Here, amidst the crackling wood and the cooling air, the real stories of the Seljuk warriors begin to unfold. Stories not just of glory and conquest, but of a complex web of politics, economics, and human ambition. Let's not sugarcoat it. The Seljuk military culture was a double-edged sword, much like the weapons they wielded. On one hand, it was a well-oiled machine of conquest and control, a force that reshaped the political landscape of the region faster than a Byzantine bureaucrat could say, tax reform. On the other hand, it was a powder keg of potential conflict, its warriors as likely to turn on each other as they were on their enemies. The Seljuks were like a medieval version of a startup, innovative, ambitious, but always one bad decision away from a spectacular implosion. Now, if you're wondering why any of this matters, picture Anatolia as the high-stakes poker table of the medieval world. The Seljuks, with their military prowess and strategic acumen, were the players who knew when to hold 'em and when to fold 'em. Their influence extended beyond mere territorial conquest. They were instrumental in shaping the geopolitics of the Middle East and beyond. Their presence in Anatolia was a constant thorn in the side of the Byzantine Empire, a reminder that the so-called eternal empire was anything but invincible. But here's where the plot thickens. The Seljuk military culture didn't just influence the immediate region, it set off a chain reaction that would echo through the centuries. Their success on the battlefield inspired other Turkic tribes, and before you knew it, the Mongols and other nomadic groups were taking notes. The ripple effect of Seljuk tactics and strategies can be seen in the future, conflicts that shaped the medieval world, from the Crusades to the rise of the Ottoman Empire. It's like the Seljuks hit the first note in a symphony that kept playing long after they were gone. And let's not forget the economic implications. The Seljuk warriors weren't just fighting for glory, they were fighting for a slice of the economic pie. Control of trade routes, access to resources, and the spoils of war were as much a part of their motivation as any grand ideological vision. According to records, controlling Anatolia meant access to lucrative trade routes that could fill a sultan's coffers faster than you can say silk and spices. This was a world where wealth and power were inextricably linked, each feeding off the other in a cycle as relentless as a Seljuk cavalry charge. Yet, amid the clashing swords and clinking coins, is a subtler narrative at play, one of myth and reality, of legends woven from the threads of real human experience. The stories told around the campfires often blurred the line between history and myth, elevating warriors to near-mythical status. It's a narrative trick as old as time, a way to inspire loyalty and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a more nuanced reality, one where the heroes were as human as the rest of us, facing dilemmas and making decisions that were as much about survival as they were about honor. Consider the tale of Alp Arslan, the Seljuk Sultan whose victory at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 is often romanticized as a flawless triumph. In reality, it was a gambit fraught with risk, a strategic high-wire act that could have gone disastrously wrong. The victory was pivotal, sure, but it was as much about Byzantine blunders as it was about Seljuk brilliance. It's a classic case of history being written by the victors, with the narrative conveniently glossing over the role of sheer luck and opportunism. As the evening wears on, the warriors begin to drift into sleep, their minds filled with dreams of future battles and past glories. The camp quiets down, but the lessons of the day linger in the cool night air. The Seljuk way of life was a delicate balance of power and politics, of myth and reality, a testament to the enduring human quest for dominance and meaning. In the grand tapestry of history, the Seljuks are a reminder that the past is never really past. It's a living, breathing entity, influencing the present and shaping the future in ways both subtle and profound. Their legacy is a complex one, marked by both their achievements and the shadows they cast, shadows that stretch across the centuries, reminding us of the intricate dance of history and the ever-present tension between the stories we tell and the realities we live. So, as you stand on the edge of this historical narrative, caught between the flicker of the campfires and the vastness of the Anatolian night, remember this. History is not a static tableau of facts and figures. It's a dynamic, ever-evolving story, one that invites us to question, to explore, and to engage with the past in all its messy, beautiful complexity. And in the case of the Seljuks, it's a story that continues to captivate, challenging us to see beyond the myths and to appreciate the rich tapestry of human experience that lies beneath. Paris in the late 17th century wasn't exactly the city of love and lights we know today. It was more like the city of questionable hygiene and overcrowded streets. Amidst this charming chaos, on November 24, 694, a boy named François-Marie Arouet was born. This kid would grow up to shake the foundations of the French establishment and ruffle more than a few powdered wigs. But most of us know him better by his pen name, Voltaire. The scene at his birth wasn't exactly the stuff of legend. His father was a notary, and his mother came from a family of modest means. No royal blood here, just good old Parisian grit. Fast forward to his teenage years, and young François-Marie was off to the prestigious Collège Louis le Grand. Think of this place as the Ivy League of its day, minus the frat parties and plus a whole lot of Latin. Here he learned the classics, philosophy, and the art of sharp rhetoric, a skill he would wield like a rapier in later years. It was during these formative years that François-Marie discovered his love for writing and his talent for getting under people's skin. He had a knack for satire that rivaled even today's best late-night comedians. While his peers were content with reciting Cicero, our young rebel was busy crafting verses that poked fun at the establishment. By the time he was in his early 20s, Voltaire had already made a name for himself, or, more accurately, had made quite a few enemies. His sharp tongue and even sharper pen got him into hot water more than once. In 1717, at the tender age of 23, he found himself in a place most of us would rather avoid, the Bastille. The charge? Slander against the regent of France, Philippe II, Duke of Orléans. It seems that Voltaire's wit had crossed the line, and the authorities decided a little time in a dark, dank cell might teach him some manners. Now, here's the thing about Voltaire and the Bastille. It wasn't all doom and gloom. Sure, the accommodations were less than 5-star, but it was here that he finally embraced his new identity. While some people spend their prison time pondering life choices, Voltaire used his to craft a new name, one that would become synonymous with Enlightenment thinking. Voltaire was born during these months of forced solitude. There's some debate about the origin of his pseudonym. Some say it's an anagram of Arouet le Jeune, Arouet the Younger. Others claim it was a nod to a family estate, or perhaps a Middle French term for volta, meaning to turn. Whatever the case, this new moniker marked a turning point in his life. Voltaire's stint in the Bastille wasn't just about rebranding. It was a time of reflection that solidified his resolve to use his words as weapons against ignorance and tyranny. He emerged from incarceration not as a broken man, but as one determined to challenge the status quo with even more fervour. His time in the slammer might have been short, about 11 months, but it was long enough to leave a lasting impression on him and on French society at large. Back on the cobblestone streets, Voltaire didn't waste any time. He continued to write with a vigour that was almost contagious. The man was a literary machine, churning out plays, poems, and pamphlets that skewered the powerful and championed the cause of reason. His wit was as sharp as ever, and his targets were plenty. He had the uncanny ability to anger both the church and the state, which, if you think about it, was quite the balancing act. But let's not paint Voltaire as a saint. He was a man of his time, and his views on certain subjects might raise an eyebrow or two today. He had a complex relationship with religion, for instance. While he was a staunch critic of the Catholic Church's influence on French politics, he wasn't exactly an atheist. Instead, he supported deism, the belief in a rational God who doesn't meddle in human affairs. This was the Enlightenment, after all, a time when reason was the new religion, and Voltaire was one of its chief apostles. Voltaire's early years in Paris were nothing short of a roller coaster, from the hallowed halls of College Louis-le-Grand to the cold stone walls of the Bastille. His journey was marked by a relentless pursuit of truth and a refusal to be silenced. He was a man who understood the power of words, and he wielded them with the precision of a surgeon. His pseudonym, crafted in the confines of a prison cell, would become a symbol of intellectual rebellion and a beacon for those who dared to think differently. In a city that was both his muse and his battleground, Voltaire carved out a legacy that would inspire generations. Whether you see him as a hero or a rebel, one thing's for certain, Voltaire was never just another face in the crowded streets of Paris. He was a force of nature, a philosopher with a penchant for provocation, and a man who proved that sometimes the pen is indeed mightier than the sword. Now, let's fast forward to one of the more dramatic episodes in Voltaire's life, his 1726 jaunt to England. And by jaunt, I mean forced exile. You see, Voltaire had a knack for making enemies, and one of his more formidable foes was the Chevalier de Rohan. After a particularly witty retort that bruised Rohan's aristocratic ego, Voltaire found himself on the business end of a good, old-fashioned beat-down. You'd think a thrashing might have taught him a lesson, but Voltaire was nothing if not tenacious. Instead of backing down, he challenged Rohan to a duel. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. Rohan's connections were too powerful, and Voltaire was carted off to the Bastille again. This time, though, he managed to negotiate a deal to leave the country rather than rot in prison. Thus began Voltaire's English adventure. England in 1726 was a different beast from France. Across the Channel, the English were experimenting with something novel, freedom of speech. Now, let's not get carried away. This wasn't the free-for-all we might imagine today, but compared to the strict censorship of France, England was practically a playground for the free exchange of ideas. Voltaire was like a kid in the candy store. He found himself rubbing elbows with some of the intellectual heavyweights of the day, like Sir Isaac Newton and John Locke. These weren't just names in a textbook to Voltaire. These were living, breathing thinkers who had a profound impact on him. Newton, with his apple and all, showed Voltaire the power of empirical science. For a man who had spent much of his life railing against dogma and superstition, Newton's mathematical universe was a revelation. Here was a world that could be understood through reason and evidence, rather than through the dictates of church or crown. Voltaire was hooked. He'd later write admiringly about Newton, even popularizing his work on the continent. Locke, on the other hand, offered Voltaire a vision of political liberalism that was refreshing to a man who had seen the inside of a French prison cell more than once. Locke's ideas about government by consent and the rights of the individual were like a breath of fresh air to Voltaire, who had spent much of his life questioning authority. While Voltaire was busy soaking up English ideas, he couldn't help but notice the differences in religious tolerance. In France, the Catholic Church was as powerful as the state, and dissenters were not tolerated. England, on the other hand, was a mixed bag. Sure, there were still restrictions, and Catholics weren't exactly the most popular group, but compared to France, England seemed like a haven of religious freedom. Voltaire was impressed by the relative harmony he observed among different faiths, and how this allowed for a more dynamic society. Of course, Voltaire being Voltaire, he couldn't just sit back and enjoy the show. He was already thinking about how to bring these English ideas back to France. The contrast between the two countries was stark. France, with its rigid class system, censorship, and religious intolerance, seemed stuck in the past. England, with its bustling economy and lively intellectual scene, represented the future. Voltaire wanted to be the bridge between these two worlds. It's important to remember that Voltaire's exile wasn't just a philosophical field trip. It was also a time of personal growth. In England, Voltaire developed a taste for the finer things in life, like English ale and Shakespeare. He even started writing in English, producing works that would later influence his style in French. His time in England was transformative, and when he eventually returned to France, he brought back more than just a suitcase full of English books. So, there you have it. Voltaire's English escapade was more than a mere detour. It was a pivotal chapter in his life. It was here that he found the tools and ideas that would shape his future critiques of French society. The Voltaire who returned to France was not the same man who had left. He was armed with new ideas and ready to challenge the status quo with even greater fervour. But as we all know, change doesn't happen overnight, and Voltaire's journey was far from over. There were still plenty of battles to be fought and more than a few feathers to ruffle. And so Voltaire returned to France, a man with more intellectual ammo than a philosophical arms dealer. He was poised to unleash a torrent of words that would shake the very core of French society, all while dodging the authorities like a verbal ninja. With the ink barely dry on his passport, Voltaire dove headfirst into writing, with the fervour of a man who had just discovered the secret to eternal life, or at least eternal controversy. Back in France, Voltaire found himself navigating the treacherous waters of censorship. The French authorities weren't exactly fans of free speech. They were more into the shut up and obey school of thought. But Voltaire had a knack for playing the game. His satirical wit was sharper than a guillotine blade, and he wielded it with the precision of a master swordsman. He had perfected the art of saying everything without seeming to say anything at all. If the censors thought they had him cornered, Voltaire was always 2 steps ahead, slipping through their fingers like sand. Enter Candide, the literary bomb. Voltaire dropped in 1759. This little book managed to cram more satire and criticism into its pages than a modern-day Twitter feed. Ostensibly a tale of adventure, Candide was a razor-sharp critique of the era's blind optimism, championed by philosophers like Leibniz, who claimed we live in the best of all possible worlds. Voltaire, ever the skeptic, wasn't buying it. In his world, if life gave you lemons, it was probably because the universe was out to get you. Candide's journey was a whirlwind tour of human folly and suffering, from the Lisbon earthquake to the brutalities of war. Voltaire wasn't just writing a story, he was holding up a mirror to society, reflecting its absurdities and injustices. The book was a hit, selling faster than hot croissants on a Parisian morning. But it wasn't all accolades and applause. Controversy followed Voltaire like a shadow. The church and state were not amused, to put it mildly. They saw Candide's as an affront to both divine providence and earthly authority. It was banned in several places, but let's be real, nothing boosts book sales like a good old-fashioned ban. Voltaire's criticism of organized religion was another sticking point. He had little patience for the church's stranglehold on power, seeing it as a bastion of superstition and corruption. He famously quipped, "Écrasez l'infâme," or "crush the infamous," which, depending on who you asked, was either a call to end religious oppression or an invitation to a particularly intense game of whack-a-mole. Voltaire wasn't anti-religion per se, he was anti-religious hypocrisy. He saw the church as needing a serious dose of humility and reason. The French authorities, however, had a love-hate relationship with Voltaire that was more tumultuous than a soap opera romance. They needed him for his intellectual prowess and diplomatic skills, yet they loathed him for his relentless critiques. Voltaire was like that one friend who tells you the hard truth you don't want to hear but can't afford to ignore. He had a way of exposing the absurdity of the status quo with a smirk and a well-placed punchline. It was a precarious dance, keeping him forever on the edge of scandal and acceptance. Voltaire's ability to use humour as a weapon was legendary. He understood that laughter was a powerful tool for subversion. Unlike a sword which could be blocked, humour slipped through defences, disarming opponents without drawing blood. His wit was a Trojan horse, delivering sharp truths wrapped in layers of jest. People laughed, often before realizing they were the butt of the joke. Despite the controversies, Voltaire's influence was undeniable. He was a celebrity of the Enlightenment, a rock star of reason, touring the intellectual landscape with a pen as his guitar. His works were translated into multiple languages, reaching audiences far beyond the borders of France. He corresponded with the great minds of Europe, shaping and being shaped by the intellectual currents of his time. Economically, Voltaire was no starving artist. He was savvy with his finances, investing in everything from government bonds to the burgeoning luxury goods market. In a time when many writers struggle to make ends meet, Voltaire was living the high life, proving that a sharp mind could indeed pay the bills, and then some. His wealth gave him a degree of independence, allowing him to thumb his nose at authority without fearing financial ruin. Yet, even with his success, Voltaire remained a man of contradictions. He was a fierce advocate for freedom, yet his own views could be surprisingly elitist. He championed the cause of the common man, yet he held a certain disdain for the uneducated masses. He was a complex figure, a product of his time, and a trailblazer who dared to think differently. His legacy is a testament to the power of words, the enduring struggle for truth, and the belief that no idea is too sacred to question. As we pause here on Voltaire's journey, know that his story is far from over. The road ahead is filled with more battles, more triumphs, and more of that signature Voltaire wit. So, stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll explore how this indomitable spirit continued to challenge the world around him, leaving an indelible mark on history. Voltaire's journey was far from over, and what a journey it was. By 1758, our man Voltaire was ready for yet another act in his theatrical life story. He was tired of the endless hustle and bustle of Paris, and who could blame him? Paris was a madhouse, and Voltaire needed a stage where he could perform his intellectual high-wire act in peace. Enter Ferney, a quaint village nestled near the Swiss border, just close enough to France to keep an eye on things, but far enough to dodge the occasional torch-wielding mob. Ferney wasn't just a sleepy village, it was Voltaire's personal kingdom. He bought the estate for 40,000 livres, a tidy sum back then, equivalent to about 400,000 today. And let's just say Voltaire was not your typical country squire. With a flair for the dramatic and a penchant for improvement, he transformed Ferney into a microcosm of Enlightenment ideals. He built roads, started industries, and even founded a watchmaking factory, turning the village into a thriving community. A bit of a fixer-upper project, but hey, who doesn't like a challenge? Now, let's talk about Voltaire's role as a public intellectual. Picture him as the 18th century version of a viral influencer, minus the social media but with all the sass. He was the go-to guy for opinions on everything from philosophy to politics. If there was a scandal, a trial, or an injustice, you could bet Voltaire had a quip ready for the occasion. His correspondence was legendary. He wrote an estimated 20,000 letters throughout his life. That's right, 20,000. Talk about commitment. He was like the original email warrior, firing off missives to everyone from Catherine the Great to Frederick the Great, navigating the European political landscape with the finesse of a chess grandmaster. Voltaire's letters were more than just idle chit-chat. They were his secret weapon, a way to spread Enlightenment ideas faster than a gossip column. He corresponded with fellow intellectual heavyweights like Rousseau, though their relationship was more frenemies than besties. Voltaire found Rousseau's romantic idealism a bit too, well, romantic. Where Rousseau saw the noble savage, Voltaire saw an opportunity for a witty takedown. He famously quipped, "I have received your new book against the human race, and I thank you for it. No one has ever employed so much intellect to persuade men to be beasts." But let's not forget that Voltaire was more than just a quippy letter writer. He had a serious side, and his advocacy for civil rights was nothing short of groundbreaking. Enter the case of Jean Calas, a Protestant merchant from Toulouse who was executed in 1762 for allegedly murdering his own son to prevent him from converting to Catholicism. The whole thing was a farce, a miscarriage of justice that reeked of religious intolerance. Cue Voltaire, the champion of reason, who launched a public campaign to exonerate Calas. It was like the 18th century version of a viral hashtag, and it worked. After a relentless 2-year battle, the French court overturned Calas's conviction posthumously, a rare victory for justice in an age when such concepts were often as murky as the Seine. Voltaire's involvement in the Calas affair wasn't just a noble deed, it was a strategic masterstroke. It highlighted the absurdities of a system that allowed religious fanaticism to masquerade as justice. Voltaire's pamphlets and writings on the case exposed the ugly underbelly of intolerance, rallying public opinion and forcing the establishment to take a long, hard look in the mirror. It was a turning point, a moment when the power of words triumphed over the power of the sword. And let's be honest, Voltaire loved nothing more than proving that his pen was mightier than any blade. But Voltaire's advocacy didn't stop there. He was a vocal critic of slavery, a stance that was as radical then as it is obvious now. He condemned the practice in his writings, pointing out the glaring hypocrisy of a society that prided itself on liberty while profiting from human misery. In his work, Candide, he sarcastically noted how Europeans justified their cruelty with so-called civilization. It was a scathing commentary that laid bare the moral bankruptcy of the time. Voltaire's influence on the Enlightenment can't be overstated. He was a lightning rod for change, a provocateur who dared to question everything from the divine right of kings to the infallibility of the Church. He didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk, using his wealth and influence to support causes he believed in. His home in Ferney became a hub for free thinkers, a sanctuary where ideas could flourish away from the prying eyes of censors. Economically, Voltaire was living proof that brains could turn a profit. He continued to build on his investments, dabbling in everything from publishing to agriculture. He was like the Warren Buffett of his time, always one step ahead of the market. His financial acumen gave him the freedom to speak his mind without fear of retribution, a luxury few could afford. Yet, for all his brilliance, Voltaire was no saint. He could be vain, petty, and occasionally elitist, traits that often rubbed people the wrong way. But perhaps that's what made him so compelling, a man of contradictions, a flawed genius who dared to challenge the status quo while acknowledging his own imperfections. As Voltaire settled into his later years, Ferney became more than just a refuge. It was a testament to his life's work. Here was a place where reason reigned supreme, a utopia built on the foundation of Enlightenment ideals. It was a fitting legacy for a man who had spent his life fighting for truth and justice, a reminder that change, no matter how slow, was always possible. So, as we pause here, remember that Voltaire's story is one of relentless pursuit, a pursuit of knowledge, of justice, and of a world where reason prevails over ignorance. His journey is far from over, and the road ahead is paved with more challenges and triumphs. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life of a man who dared to dream of a better world, one witty remark at a time. And so, as Voltaire basked in the glow of his Ferney retreat, 1778 rolled around like a grand finale, with Voltaire himself as the star performer. The man who had spent years dodging the French authorities like a literary ninja was finally ready to return to Paris. His triumphant comeback was akin to a rock star reunion tour, minus the pyrotechnics, but with all the fanfare. Picture the scene, an 83-year-old Voltaire, frail but still sharp as ever, being welcomed like a conquering hero. Paris, the city he had critiqued and adored in equal measure, was ready to embrace him once more. Voltaire's return wasn't just a personal victory, it was a testament to his enduring influence. By the time he strutted back into Paris, the city was already buzzing with the ideas he had championed for decades. The Enlightenment was no longer just a whisper among intellectual circles. It was a full-blown movement, and Voltaire was its elder statesman. When he arrived at the Comédie Française to see a performance of his play, Irene, the crowd erupted. They treated him like royalty, even crowning him with a laurel wreath, a fitting tribute for a man whose words had so often been his weapon of choice. But while Paris celebrated Voltaire the legend, it's crucial to remember the man behind the myth. Voltaire, for all his brilliance, was a bundle of contradictions. He championed freedom of speech and religious tolerance, yet his views could be as judgmental as they were revolutionary. He was an advocate for the common man but also moved comfortably among the elite. He was a skeptic who questioned everything, yet he held certain prejudices that would raise eyebrows today. Voltaire was like the ultimate paradox, a man who could argue both sides of a debate and somehow still leave the room convinced he was right. As a philosopher, Voltaire's impact on modern thought is undeniable. He was one of the great architects of the Enlightenment, a movement that dared to put reason before superstition and science before dogma. If today we take for granted the idea that reason and evidence should guide our understanding of the world, we owe a debt to Voltaire and his contemporaries. They laid the groundwork for what we now consider fundamental rights: freedom of thought, expression, and belief. Voltaire's call to écraser l'enfant was not just a rallying cry against religious tyranny, it was a demand for a society built on rational principles. Yet, let's not get swept away in the romanticism of it all. Voltaire's life was far from a fairy tale. He navigated a complex web of alliances and rivalries, not unlike a 21st-century political strategist. His relationship with the French authorities was a constant balancing act, a dance of mutual need and suspicion. Despite his reputation as a defender of liberty, Voltaire was no stranger to self-interest. He was a master of networking, using his connections to protect himself and further his causes. In many ways, Voltaire was as much a product of his time as he was a pioneer of new ideas. Economically, Voltaire was a shrewd operator. His financial success wasn't merely a happy accident. It was the result of calculated decisions. Owning land, investing in burgeoning industries, and even dabbling in the lottery. Voltaire understood that economic independence was a key to intellectual freedom. He wasn't just a thinker, he was an entrepreneur, ensuring that his pockets were as full as his mind. Now, let's talk legacy. Voltaire's influence extended far beyond his lifetime, and his ideas continued to shape the world long after he was gone. His writings inspired some of the greatest minds of the French Revolution, who took his calls for liberty and equality and ran with them, sometimes quite literally, to the barricades. Yet, Voltaire's legacy is not without its shadows. His critiques of organized religion were groundbreaking, but his views on race and class were less enlightened. It's a reminder that even the greatest thinkers are not immune to the prejudices of their time. As we wrap up this journey through Voltaire's life, it's clear that his story is one of contradictions and complexities. He was a thinker who relished in challenging authority, yet he was also a man who enjoyed his creature comforts. He was a voice for reason in an age of superstition, yet he struggled with the same human foibles that plague us all. Voltaire's legacy is a testament to the power of ideas and the enduring struggle to make the world a more just and rational place. In the end, Voltaire's life was a testament to the idea that change is possible, not just through grand revolutions, but through the steady, relentless pursuit of truth. He showed us that the pen is indeed mightier than the sword, that wit can topple tyrants, and that sometimes asking the right questions is more powerful than having all the answers. As we close the book on Voltaire's story, we're left with a legacy that's as challenging as it is inspiring, a legacy that reminds us that the fight for reason and justice is never truly over, and that sometimes the most profound truths come wrapped in a well-timed joke. In the bustling intellectual salons of late 19th century Europe, where academic elites puffed cigars and exchanged ideas like currency, the air was thick with the belief that physics was a done deal. It was a time when the scientific community, riding high on the triumphs of Newtonian mechanics, was convinced they had the universe all figured out. Enter Max Planck, a young German mind who would soon turn the smug certainty on its head. But if you told young Max that he'd revolutionize physics, he'd probably have laughed it off. After all, he was advised against pursuing a career in physics with the classic line, "My dear boy, don't waste your time, everything important has already been discovered." Born in Kiel, Germany in 1858, Max Carl Ernst Ludwig Planck, he had that many names, was the son of a law professor, not exactly the Galileo-type rebellious upbringing you'd expect for someone about to shake up the scientific world. The Planck family was as solid and respectable as a German beer stein, and young Max was the kind of kid who'd rather solve a math puzzle than kick a football. He wasn't exactly the life of the party, but hey, he had a knack for the piano and a brain that could run circles around most adults. Now, let's talk about the academic environment that shaped Planck. In those days, German universities were the Ivy League of Europe. Students flocked to places like the University of Munich and the University of Berlin, like moths to a flame. But, despite the intellectual buzz, physics was considered as thrilling as watching paint dry. The big questions were all answered right? Wrong. But nobody knew that yet, not even Planck. When Max started his university education in 1874 at the tender age of 16, he initially flirted with the idea of studying mathematics. However, the allure of physics, despite its supposedly plumbed depths, proved too strong. His professors included the likes of Hermann von Helmholtz and Gustav Kirchhoff, the rock stars of physics at the time. Planck, bright-eyed and ready to conquer, was told by his advisors to reconsider his choice. The message was clear: physics was a graveyard for ambitious minds. Apparently nobody told Planck that he was supposed to play it safe. Despite the naysayers, Planck persisted. He graduated at 21. Summa cum laude, no less, which is Latin for "take that, doubters." After that, it was time for the next academic hurdle, the habilitation, a postdoctoral qualification required to teach in German universities. And so, in 1880, at the ripe old age of 22, Planck became a Privatdozent, a fancy German term for underpaid lecturer. He took up a position at the University of Munich, earning little more than pocket change but gaining something far more valuable: academic freedom. What makes Planck's early career particularly amusing is that while he was teaching the established laws of thermodynamics, he was also quietly dismantling them in his own mind. You see, Planck had a knack for questioning the unshakable truths of physics. It was like he was the only guy in a room full of people who thought the emperor's new clothes were fabulous, and he had the audacity to wonder if the emperor was, in fact, naked. By 1889, Planck moved to the University of Berlin, a place that would become his intellectual playground. There he rubbed elbows with the crème de la crème of German science. It was around this time that he started dabbling with black-body radiation, a seemingly dull topic that would soon explode into something far more exciting. But we're not there yet. Planck was a meticulous man, the kind who'd probably alphabetize his spice rack. He was also a bit of a rebel, albeit a quiet one. The notion that energy could only exist in discrete packets quanta was brewing in the back of his mind like a storm on the horizon. But first, he had to get through the drudgery of academic life. In a world where the scientific establishment was as rigid as a Prussian officer, Planck's willingness to challenge the status quo was nothing short of revolutionary. The irony, of course, is that he never set out to be a rebel. He was just a guy who picked at the loose threads of accepted truths until they unraveled. Planck's early academic life was a blend of brilliance, skepticism, and just the right touch of stubbornness. He was the underdog in a story where the giants of classical physics had already written the script. Little did they know, Planck was about to rewrite the rules, quanta by quanta. As the 19th century drew to a close, the stage was set for a scientific upheaval, and Max Planck, the man who was advised against studying physics, would soon be at the epicenter of it all. And just like that, the stage was set for Max Planck to do what everyone thought impossible: flip the physics world on its head with a topic that, on the surface, sounds about as riveting as watching a pot of water come to a boil black-body radiation. Now, before you roll your eyes and click over to a cat video, let me assure you, this is the plot twist you didn't know you needed. You see, black-body radiation was the kind of scientific conundrum that could make even the most seasoned physicist's head spin. Picture this. Objects, when heated, emit radiation. Basic stuff, right? The kicker is, nobody could quite figure out why the radiation didn't match up with the predictions of classical physics. It was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and the peg kept laughing at you. Enter Planck, who was about to tackle this problem like a Sudoku puzzle on a lazy Sunday afternoon. In the late 1890s, while most people were busy marveling at the wonders of the Industrial Revolution, Planck was knee-deep in equations trying to make sense of this radiation mess. The laws of thermodynamics and electromagnetism, reliable as a Swiss watch, just weren't cutting it. Physicists like Wilhelm Wien had made valiant attempts, but their solutions only worked for certain wavelengths. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor, and it was Planck's job to crack the punchline. Now, Max Planck wasn't your typical rebel. He didn't storm the gates of conventional physics with a banner reading, "Down with Newton." No, he was more of a quiet revolutionary, the kind of guy who'd sneak a new idea into the scientific conversation and watch it spread like wildfire. In 1900, after much head-scratching and probably a few pots of strong German coffee, Planck proposed something radical. Energy isn't a continuous wave, but rather comes in discrete packets called quanta. Imagine that. A universe that deals in bite-sized energy snacks instead of one big cosmic buffet. It's worth noting that Planck didn't set out to revolutionize physics. He was just looking to solve the black-body radiation puzzle. In fact, He was so reluctant to accept his own idea that you could almost hear the skepticism in his voice. But the numbers didn't lie. To fit the experimental data, Planck had to assume that energy was quantized. It was as if he had discovered a secret menu item at the universe's diner, and boy, did it change the order of things. Planck's constant, a term you might remember from high school physics if you weren't busy doodling in your notebook, became the cornerstone of this new theory. It was a tiny number, 622.607.015 x 10^34 joule, seconds to be precise, but its implications were colossal. With this, Planck managed to predict the spectral energy distribution of blackbody radiation at all temperatures, a feat that classical physics could only dream of. The scientific community, predictably, didn't know what to make of it. Imagine being told that everything you thought you knew about energy was just a warm-up act for the main event. It was like telling a room full of chefs that they'd been using the wrong recipe for bread all along. Planck's idea was met with a mix of intrigue and skepticism, and it wasn't until Albert Einstein came along a few years later with his explanation of the photoelectric effect that the world really started paying attention. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's a tale for another time. Economically, the implications of Planck's work were profound. While the average person was more concerned with the price of bread and coal, Planck's discovery laid the groundwork for technologies that would revolutionize the 20th century. Without quantum theory, we might not have semiconductors, lasers, or even the smartphone you're probably using to listen to this right now. And all because Planck couldn't leave well enough alone with blackbody radiation. In the grand scheme of things, Planck's introduction of energy quanta was like a brick through the window of classical physics, a jarring wake-up call that paved the way for the quantum revolution. The irony? Planck himself was a staunch conservative at heart, more comfortable in the world of classical physics than the wild frontier of quantum mechanics. Yet here he was, the reluctant pioneer, forever changing the landscape of science. So, was Planck a genius, or just a guy who happened to ask the right questions at the right time? Maybe a bit of both. What's clear is that his work didn't just challenge the status quo, it demolished it, brick by brick. And while he didn't set out to be a rebel, that's exactly what he became, a soft-spoken revolutionary with a penchant for meticulous calculations and just enough audacity to question the unshakable truths of his day. As we leave Planck on the cusp of this scientific upheaval, remember this. Sometimes the most groundbreaking discoveries come not from those who seek to change the world, but from those who simply can't ignore the inconsistencies staring them in the face. Planck's journey was far from over, and as we'll see, the world of physics was just beginning to grapple with the implications of his reluctant revelation. Stay tuned, because the quantum roller coaster has only begun its wild ride. As the quantum roller coaster took off, it wasn't long before it picked up some eager passengers. Enter the young guns of physics, Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr, two names that would soon become synonymous with scientific brilliance and, let's be honest, hairstyle choices that would put rock stars to shame. But back in those early 1900s, they were just a couple of ambitious minds ready to ride the wave that Planck had inadvertently set in motion. Picture a world where Einstein, still years away from being the poster child of relativity, was a lowly patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland. His days were filled with mundane technicalities, but his mind was an open field, ripe for the seeds of revolutionary ideas. In 1905, while the rest of the world was busy dealing with the usual human affairs, wars, politics, and the occasional scandal, Einstein published 4 pivotal papers. Among these was his explanation of the photoelectric effect, which relied on Planck's quantum theory. This was no small feat. It was like taking an obscure indie band and turning them into an overnight sensation. Planck's quanta became the talk of the scientific town, and suddenly the physics community was buzzing with energy, quite literally. Meanwhile, a young Danish physicist named Niels Bohr was cutting his teeth on Planck's ideas across Europe. Bohr, whose name is now etched in the annals of atomic theory, saw the potential in these tiny packets of energy and ran with it. He used Planck's constant to develop his model of the atom, a radical departure from the classical models that portrayed atoms as miniature solar systems. Bohr's atom was a bit more rebellious, with electrons orbiting in quantized shells instead of predictable paths. It was as if Bohr had taken the neat, orderly world of classical physics and introduced it to jazz. But before we paint a picture of universal acceptance, let's not forget the initial skepticism Planck's ideas faced. The scientific community, notorious for being as resistant to change as a cat to a bath, was hesitant to embrace this newfangled quantum theory. Some of the old guard of physics scoffed at the notion, clinging to their classical models like security blankets. It was as if Planck had shown up at a Victorian tea party with a skateboard, and the guests weren't quite sure whether to applaud or faint. Yet the younger generation was captivated. Einstein once remarked, in his characteristically understated way, that Planck's theory was an act of desperation. And while that might sound like a backhanded compliment, it was actually high praise. Desperation, after all, is often the mother of invention. The beauty of Planck's work lay in its ability to explain the unexplainable, to make sense of the cosmic chaos that classical physics couldn't decode. As the 20th century marched on, Planck found himself thrust into the spotlight. He was no longer just an academic grinding away in his study, he was a bona fide celebrity scientist. And let's be real, navigating the celebrity life when you're more comfortable with equations than cocktails is no easy feat. Planck's newfound fame was both exhilarating and perplexing. He was the reluctant rock star of the scientific world, and while he accepted the accolades with humility, he never quite got used to the attention. Imagine trying to explain quantum theory to a dinner party guest who just wanted to know if you'd seen the latest opera. Planck's humility in the face of fame was a testament to his character. Despite being the architect of a scientific revolution, he remained grounded. He continued to teach, preferring the quiet halls of academia to the roaring applause of public accolades. It's said that when he received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1918, he accepted it not with a grand speech, but with a simple nod to his colleagues and a heartfelt thank you. He was, in many ways, the anti-celebrity, a reminder that greatness doesn't always come with a spotlight and a soundtrack. Economically, the implications of Planck's theory stretched far beyond the ivory towers of academia. While the average person might not have been dissecting quantum equations over breakfast, the technological advancements that followed Planck's work would soon touch every aspect of daily life. From the development of semiconductors and transistors to the birth of the digital age, Planck's quanta paved the way for innovations that reshaped industries and economies. It was like a quiet revolution, one that didn't announce itself with fanfare, but instead crept into the fabric of modern life, altering it irrevocably. Politically, the world was on the brink of significant change, and the scientific community was no exception. As nations vied for technological supremacy, Planck's quantum theory became a tool in the arsenal of progress. It's a curious thing, really, how a theory born out of pure curiosity and intellectual pursuit can become a catalyst for economic and political power. But such is the paradox of science, its ability to transcend its origins and impact the world in unforeseen ways. As Planck navigated his new reality, he did so with a grace that belied the monumental impact of his work. He continued to teach and mentor, sharing his passion for physics with the next generation of scientists. His lectures were legendary, not for their flamboyance, but for their clarity and insight. In an era where the notion of quantum theory was still met with furrowed brows and skeptical murmurs, Planck's ability to demystify the complex was nothing short of magical. And so, as we leave Planck, amidst his rise to scientific stardom, remember this. In the world of groundbreaking discoveries, not every hero wears a cape. Some wear lab coats and carry chalk, quietly rewriting the rules of reality. Planck's journey was far from over, and as we'll see, the quantum landscape he helped to create was only the beginning of a new era in physics. So, buckle up, because this ride is far from over. As Planck's star continued to rise in the scientific cosmos, the world outside the lecture halls was gearing up for a rather different kind of upheaval. Enter the early 20th century, a time when the word war was set to gain a grim new prefix, world. Max Planck, now a towering figure in physics, found himself in a peculiar position as Europe marched inexorably towards World War I. Here's the kicker, Planck, who had always preferred the quiet scribble of chalk on a blackboard to the clash of political ideologies, was thrust into a world where science and politics were increasingly intertwined. Picture the scene. A man devoted to the abstract principles of quantum mechanics now grappling with the very tangible consequences of nationalism and conflict. It was as if Newton's apple had dropped not just on his head, but straight into the turbulent waters of realpolitik. Planck's personal life was no less tempestuous. His first wife, Marie Merck, passed away in 1909, leaving him to raise their children. He remarried in 1911 to Marga von Huysland, but the scars of loss lingered like faint chalk lines on a blackboard. With the outbreak of war in 1914, Planck's own sons were swept up in the patriotic fervour that gripped Germany. His eldest son, Karl, was killed in action in 1916, a devastating blow that underscored the brutal intersection of his private sorrows with the public chaos. It was a personal tragedy that no amount of scientific reasoning could mitigate. Despite the war raging around him, Planck remained committed to his scientific endeavours. In a period where the word diplomatic was often paired with immunity, Planck took on a role that was both unlikely and entirely fitting, a diplomatic bridge within the scientific community. He became president of the Kaiser Wilhelm Society, now known as the Max Planck Society, a posthumous nod to his legacy in 1916, a position that required him to keep the German scientific enterprise afloat amidst the storm of war. Planck's tenure as president is a testament to his unwavering dedication to science, even as the world around him crumbled. He was, in many ways, the scientific community's version of a lighthouse keeper, maintaining a steady beacon of reason amidst the fog of war. His efforts to keep scientific dialogues open between nations, even those at war, were a remarkable feat of quiet diplomacy. Planck believed that the pursuit of knowledge transcended borders, a conviction that was as radical as it was necessary. The irony of Planck's situation was not lost on him. Here was a man whose life's work was built on the premise of quantized energy, yet he found himself navigating a world where chaos seemed the only constant. It was a bit like trying to apply quantum theory to a rugby match. Utterly nonsensical, yet somehow Planck managed to find a semblance of order amidst the disorder. Economically, the war years were a time of scarcity and hardship, even for a scientist of Planck's stature. Inflation in Germany was rampant, and the cost of living skyrocketed, making the pursuit of scientific research an exercise in financial acrobatics. Laboratory budgets were sliced thinner than the proverbial German sausage, and resources were redirected to the war effort. Yet, Planck's commitment to academic excellence remained unwavering, a testament to his belief in the power of science as a force for good. Politically, Planck's position was as precarious as a tightrope walk across the Berlin skyline. He was a man of peace in a time of war, a proponent of international collaboration when nationalism was the order of the day. His attempts to maintain scientific integrity and dialogue were not without risk. After all, in a world where allegiances were as changeable as the weather, his actions could easily have been misconstrued as treasonous. But Planck, ever the diplomat, managed to walk this fine line with a grace that belied the tensions of the era. And then, as if the universe hadn't thrown enough at him, the post-war period brought its own set of challenges. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 imposed harsh reparations on Germany, leading to economic turmoil that would make even the steadiest scientists' heads spin. The hyperinflation of the early 1920s saw the German mark plummet in value. At one point, a loaf of bread cost billions of marks. It was a time when pocket change became pocket paper, and financial stability was a distant memory. In this economic maelstrom, Planck's role as a scientific leader became even more crucial. He advocated for the rebuilding of Germany's scientific infrastructure, emphasizing the importance of education and research in national recovery. His efforts to secure funding for scientific pursuits were nothing short of Herculean, as he navigated a landscape where financial resources were scarcer than an unclaimed seat at one of his lectures. Socially, Planck's era was one of seismic shifts. The Roaring Twenties, with their jazz-fueled exuberance, stood in stark contrast to the sober realities of a nation in recovery. Planck, ever the stoic, remained focused on his work, even as the world around him danced to a frenetic new beat. It was a period of both cultural renaissance and political unrest, and Planck's ability to maintain his scientific integrity amidst the noise was nothing short of remarkable. As the 1920s gave way to the 1930s, Planck found himself once again on the brink of a world in turmoil. The rise of the Nazi regime in Germany posed a new set of challenges for the aging scientist. Planck, who had spent his life advocating for the universality of science, was now faced with a political ideology that sought to impose its own version of scientific truth. The Nazi regime's emphasis on Aryan supremacy and its dismissal of Jewish science posed a direct threat to the international scientific community Planck had worked so hard to uphold. Planck's response was one of quiet resistance. He continued to advocate for scientific collaboration and integrity, even as the political climate grew increasingly hostile. His refusal to bow to the regime's demands was an act of defiance that spoke volumes about his character. It was a stand that came at great personal risk, yet Planck remained undeterred. His belief in the power of science as a bridge between cultures and nations was unshakable, even in the face of mounting adversity. In 1938, at the age of 80, Planck retired from his position as president of the Kaiser Wilhelm Society. It was a decision born out of necessity. The political pressures of the time had become too great for even the most steadfast of scientists. Yet, even in retirement, Planck's influence on the scientific community remained profound. He continued to write and lecture, sharing his insights and experiences with a new generation of physicists. Despite the political turmoil, Planck's legacy endured. His commitment to scientific integrity and international collaboration left an indelible mark on the field of physics. As the world teetered on the brink of another global conflict, Planck's work served as a reminder of the power of science to transcend borders and bring people together. It was a legacy that would endure long after the tumult of his era had passed. And so, as we leave Planck navigating the final chapters of his life, remember this. In a world where chaos often reigns supreme, the quiet strength of conviction can be a powerful force for change. Planck's journey was one of resilience and dedication, a testament to the enduring power of scientific inquiry in the face of adversity. Stay tuned, because the story of Max Planck is far from over. Max Planck, the reluctant revolutionary, found himself at the twilight of a career that had reshaped the very fabric of physics. Here was a man who had cracked open the universe's user manual, revealing quantum mechanics as its hidden chapter. Yet, the irony of this revelation was that Planck himself remained somewhat ambivalent about the quantum beast he'd unleashed. He was like a chef who'd accidentally invented a dish that everyone else raved about, but he still preferred the classics. In his heart, Planck was a classical physicist, a man who never fully abandoned the comforting precision of Newtonian mechanics. It's a bit like being the inventor of rock and roll, but secretly loving Bach. Despite his personal reservations, Planck's legacy is a cornerstone of modern physics. His quantum theory didn't just pave the way for understanding the micro-world, it laid the groundwork for the technological revolutions of the 20th and 21st centuries. Imagine a world without MRI machines, lasers, or semiconductor technology. Now try to picture going a day without your smartphone or computer. Exactly. Planck's moment of desperation, as Einstein fondly put it, became the catalyst for an era of innovation that transformed not just science but society at large. Let's talk numbers because, as any good physicist will tell you, the devil's in the details. The semiconductor industry alone, worth over $500 billion as of 2023, owes its existence to the quantum principles Planck set in motion. His constant 6.2607.015 x 10^234 joule-seconds might sound like a throwaway line from a physics textbook, but it's the silent partner in every piece of modern technology you can think of. It's the unsung hero in a saga of silicon chips and binary code, quietly ensuring the world keeps spinning at its digital pace. But beyond the economic boom, Planck's work had a profound impact on the philosophical landscape of science. Before Planck, physics was a world of certainties and absolutes. Entering the quantum arena meant stepping into a world where probability and uncertainty reigned supreme. The observer effect, Schrödinger's cat, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. These concepts shifted the paradigm, turning determinism on its head and giving philosophers something new to chew on. It's the sort of academic upheaval that keeps the coffee flowing in ivory towers and the debate lively at conferences. Politically, Planck's quantum theory became a cultural touchstone, especially during the Cold War, as nations raced to harness nuclear energy, a direct application of quantum mechanics. The Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, was steeped in quantum theory. It was a grim reminder that scientific breakthroughs can be double-edged swords with the power to create and destroy. But let's not saddle Planck with guilt by association. His work was pure science. How humanity chose to wield it was another story entirely. Socially, Planck's theories nudged open the doors for a new generation of scientists. The likes of Einstein, Bohr, and Heisenberg stood on his shoulders, taking his ideas and running with them to places even he hadn't imagined. The ripple effect of Planck's work can be seen in the careers of countless physicists who followed, each exploring a universe of possibilities that his quanta unveiled. Yet, the myth of Planck as the mystical father of quantum mechanics deserves a reality check. The truth is, Planck wasn't entirely comfortable with the quantum implications of his discovery. He was a man caught between two worlds, the deterministic past of classical physics and the probabilistic future of quantum mechanics. It's a bit like a rock star who accidentally invented a new genre but preferred to play acoustic sets. Planck accepted his Nobel Prize in 1918 with characteristic humility, likely aware that the full implications of his work were still unfolding. What's fascinating is how Planck's journey speaks to the nature of scientific discovery itself. He was a man who asked uncomfortable questions and wasn't afraid to follow the data, even when it led him to places he didn't entirely believe in. This relentless pursuit of truth, regardless of personal belief or comfort, is what sets great scientists apart. It's not about having all the answers, it's about having the courage to ask the questions that matter. As we wrap up Planck's story, we're left with a legacy that's as enduring as it is transformative. Here was a man who, despite, or perhaps because of his reluctance, reshaped the landscape of physics and left an indelible mark on history. Planck's journey from a hesitant quantizer to a pivotal figure in quantum theory is a testament to the power of curiosity and the impact of asking, what if, in a world that insists it is. In the grand narrative of scientific history, Max Planck stands as a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes come from those who didn't set out to change the world at all. His legacy is not just in the equations that bear his name or the technologies that owe their existence to his theories, but in the spirit of inquiry and skepticism that every scientist carries forward. Planck may not have fully embraced the quantum revolution, but he certainly sparked it, leaving future generations to wonder, debate, and build upon the foundations he so reluctantly laid. And that, dear listener, is a legacy worth pondering as you drift into a sleep filled with quanta and questions. Long before Instagram influencers and viral TikToks, the Greeks were crafting a different kind of legend, one made of wood, sweat, and salty sea spray. You see, in the early days, Greek naval power was less about mighty fleets and more about a bunch of determined folks trying not to get seasick. But don't let the humble beginnings fool you. By the time they were done, these folks were cruising the Mediterranean like they owned it. Back in the 8th century BCE, when most people thought of the sea as the world's biggest, scariest bathtub, the Greeks were busy transforming themselves from landlocked farmers to mariners of mythic proportions. Initially, they weren't exactly the Poseidons of the ancient world. Nope, they were more like the awkward teenagers of the maritime scene, just trying to figure out which end of the boat was which. Their early ships were little more than oversized canoes with a sail slapped on for good measure. The Greeks knew they needed to up their game if they wanted to be taken seriously. Enter the trireme, a sleek, three-layered rowboat on steroids. Designed for speed, agility, and ramming power, the trireme was the ancient equivalent of strapping a rocket to a skateboard. It wasn't just a ship, it was a statement. We're here, and we're ready to make waves. Developing the trireme was not just about looking cool at the annual ship parade. It was a strategic move. The Greeks understood that to control the seas, you needed more than just muscle, you needed brains. The trireme was their brainchild, fast enough to outrun enemies and sturdy enough to send them to Davy Jones's locker, ancient style. It was like the Swiss Army knife of ships, except instead of a corkscrew, it had a battering ram. But, oh the cost. Building a single trireme could set you back a cool talent of silver, roughly equivalent to 26 kilograms of the shiny stuff. And in ancient Greece, silver wasn't exactly falling from the sky like confetti at a modern-day wedding. Maintaining a fleet was a logistical nightmare too. It was a bit like owning a sports car collection without a garage. You had to keep them afloat. Fed, yes, ships have appetites too. Think maintenance and crew salaries, and ready to sail at a moment's notice. The Greeks didn't just wake up one morning with a fleet of triremes parked in their harbours, though. It took time, trial, and a fair amount of error. There were plenty of early naval blunders. Picture this. a bunch of ships crashing into each other because someone forgot to yell "Starboard!" at the right moment. Or worse, running aground because someone misjudged the coastline. They were learning, and like most learning experiences, it was often painful and expensive. It wasn't just the ships that needed work, the crew did too. Rowing a trireme was no easy task. It required coordination, muscle, and the ability to follow orders without asking, "Are we there yet?" every 5 minutes. The Greeks had to train their men to row in perfect harmony, like some ancient synchronized swimming team, except with oars and probably a lot more shouting. Despite these early hiccups, the Greeks persevered. They understood that mastery of the waves meant power, trade, and influence. They were playing the long game, investing in a future where they wouldn't just survive, they'd thrive. It was a strategic vision that would eventually lead them to face off against the mightiest powers of their time, proving that the real power wasn't in the size of your fleet, but how you used it. As for the mythic tales, they were as much a part of the Greeks' naval legacy as the ships themselves. Stories of gods and monsters, of heroic voyages and epic battles. These were the tales that fueled the imagination of the Greek people and inspired them to venture further and further from their shores. The romantic allure of these stories can't be denied, even if the truth was often less glamorous. So, next time you hear about the mighty Greek navy, remember, it all started with a few brave souls willing to take the plunge into the unknown, armed with nothing more than wooden ships and the kind of determination that could make even the gods take notice. The Greeks, a people who took "go big or go home" to heart long before it was a motivational poster in a gym. By the 5th century BCE, they had mastered the art of naval warfare so completely that their enemies probably wished Poseidon would just swallow them whole. This wasn't just about bragging rights. It was a full-blown geopolitical chess game where the stakes were as high as a philosopher on hemlock. Enter the Persian Wars, a saga so epic it makes modern blockbusters look like bedtime stories. Central to this drama was the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE, the ancient world's equivalent of a heavyweight championship, except with more splinters and fewer referees. Themistocles, the Athenian mastermind, knew this was the moment to shine or sink. As a strategist, he was less about brute force and more about turning the tide with a well-placed whisper. The guy had foresight that would make a modern CEO blush. Let's rewind a bit. Themistocles had convinced Athens to invest in a fleet of triremes, turning their city into a maritime powerhouse. This was no small feat, considering the Athenians had a penchant for debating everything from the best type of sandal to the meaning of life. Each trireme cost about a talent of silver, remember? That didn't just grow on trees, it came from the rich veins of the Laurium mines. This silver rush was Athens' secret weapon, funding a navy that could not only defend but also flex some serious muscle. Picture Themistocles standing before the Athenian assembly, selling his vision like a masterful pitchman. "Ladies and gentlemen," he'd say, "invest in our navy, and I promise you'll see returns that make your amphorae overflow." Okay, maybe not those exact words, but you get the idea. Themistocles understood that the real power was economic. It's like he had a crystal ball showing him the future of naval warfare, control the seas, control the trade routes, and, ultimately, control the fate of empires. Now, on to the battle itself. The Greeks, outnumbered and outgunned by the Persian armada, were like the scrappy underdogs in a sports movie, but instead of a pep talk from a washed-up coach, they had the cunning of Themistocles. He lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis, a tactical move that was pure genius. The cramped waterway neutralized the Persians' numerical advantage, turning their vast fleet into a cumbersome traffic jam. The Greeks, with their nimble triremes, sliced through the Persian ships like a hot knife through feta. This wasn't just a battle, it was a masterclass in strategy. The Greeks embraced the chaos of war, turning it into a symphony of disciplined mayhem. Their victory at Salamis was a turning point in the Persian Wars, proving that clever tactics and naval prowess could outshine sheer numbers. It was like watching David not just beat Goliath, but outmaneuver him with a well-timed sidestep and a wink. But before you start crafting a medal for Spartan heroics, let's take a cold, hard look at the reality. The Spartans, often hailed as the ultimate warriors, were conspicuously absent from the naval showdown at Salamis. They were busy holding the line at Thermopylae in the most dramatic last stand history could script. Yet, while their sacrifice was brave, it was the Athenian navy that truly turned the tide. Spartan legend is intoxicating, sure, but it's a bit like giving all the credit to the bass player in a rock band. Important, yes, but not the headliner. The gritty logistics behind the Battle of Salamis were anything but glamorous. Naval warfare was a messy business, involving not just strategic genius, but a staggering amount of coordination. Imagine feeding and maintaining thousands of rowers, not to mention keeping the ships in fighting shape. It was a logistical nightmare that required meticulous planning and resources. The reality of war was more about rationing supplies and repairing hulls than the romantic vision of valor and victory. And the economic backbone? It was as sturdy as a trireme's keel. The funding for this naval juggernaut came from a combination of public and private investments, with wealthy Athenians sponsoring ships in a sort of ancient Kickstarter campaign. The economy was the silent partner in this grand endeavour, ensuring that the fleet was ready to sail at a moment's notice. It was a delicate balance of power, politics, and pocketbooks, a dance that the Athenians executed with impeccable timing. The aftermath of Salamis wasn't just a military victory, it was a seismic shift in the balance of power. The Persian threat was far from over, but the Greeks had proven that they were a force to be reckoned with. They had turned the tide, quite literally, ensuring that their legacy would be one of innovation and daring. The story of Salamis is a testament to the power of strategic foresight and the relentless pursuit of mastery over the waves. As we sail forward in this tale of naval prowess, remember that the Greeks weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a vision of the future. They were crafting a legacy that would echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity and the relentless spirit of those who dare to dream big. So, hold on to your togas, because the journey is far from over. There are more waves to ride and myths to debunk as we delve deeper into the annals of ancient naval warfare. And so, with the Battle of Salamis echoing through history like the clash of cymbals in a symphony of maritime madness, Athens ascended to the throne of naval supremacy. It wasn't so much a gentle rise as it was a turbocharged ascent catapulted by their triremes and a splash of ambition. But this wasn't a story of a harmonious chorus. It was more like a rock band where Athens was the lead singer and the rest of Greece reluctantly played backup. Welcome to the Delian League, folks. This wasn't your average neighborhood watch. It was more like a protection racket with a fancy name. Formed in 478 BCE, the Delian League was Athens' answer to the Persian threat, and it came with a membership policy that was more join or else than RSVP at your convenience. Initially, around 150 city-states signed up, lured by promises of mutual defense and prosperity. In reality, it was Athens holding the keys to the kingdom, while everyone else paid tribute in the form of ships or cold, hard cash. Athens, ever the savvy operator, used the League as both shield and sword. They positioned themselves as the noble protectors of Greek freedom, while ensuring their own coffers were as full as a Spartan's ego. The League's treasury was initially housed on the sacred island of Delos, and it was here that Athens donned the crown of economic overlord. They controlled the purse strings with the finesse of a master puppeteer, pulling the strings of power to fortify their fleet and fund their grandiose projects. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't a benevolent dictatorship, it was politics with a capital P. The other city-states quickly realized they weren't so much allies as they were vassals. Athens demanded tributes, and when the ships and silver weren't forthcoming, they didn't send a polite reminder letter. No, they sent triremes, ensuring compliance the way only a fleet of warships can, by staring you down until you handed over the goods. Economically, Athens' dominance was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the influx of revenue transformed the city into the ancient equivalent of a booming startup. Infrastructure projects soared, the Parthenon rose from the Acropolis like a marble phoenix, and Athens became a beacon of art, philosophy, and democracy. But the cost? Oh, the cost was as steep as the steps of the Parthenon itself. Maintaining a vast fleet drained resources faster than you could say, Eureka! The army of rowers, the constant repairs, the endless demand for oars, each ship was a floating money pit. Politically, Athens' naval prowess was a game-changer. Power shifted towards the demos, the common folk who manned the oars. This wasn't just a shift in tides, it was a seismic upheaval. The rowers, the backbone of the fleet, demanded a say in the decisions that affected their lives. The rise of the navy democratized Athenian politics, transforming the assembly into a vibrant marketplace of ideas. Every citizen had a voice, and if you think modern politics is noisy, you've got nothing on an Athenian assembly where every issue was debated like it was the last bottle of wine at a symposium. Yet, Athens's golden age was not without its shadows. The very instruments of their power also sowed the seeds of discord. Cue the Peloponnesian War, a 27-year marathon of conflict that began in 431 BCE, a war that pitted Athens and its empire against Sparta and its allies. It was like the world's most dramatic breakup, with more battles and fewer love songs. The war dragged on like a never-ending soap opera, each episode more tragic than the last. Maritime battles were the heartbeats of this war, and Athens was the master conductor. They ruled the waves, launching daring raids and blockades with the agility of a leopard on Red Bull. But here's the twist. For all their naval prowess, Athens couldn't deliver the knockout punch. Sparta, ever the land-based juggernaut, was like a stubborn stain that refused to be scrubbed away, no matter how many naval victories Athens racked up. Now, let's talk about Sicily, a tale that reads like a tragicomedy with more twists than a Greek tragedy. In 45 BCE, Athens hatched a plan to invade Sicily, convinced that controlling the island would tip the scales in their favor. Picture it, a vast armada, 34 triremes strong, setting sail with dreams of glory and conquest. It had all the makings of an epic success, except someone forgot to check the script for plot holes. What followed was a debacle of Homeric proportions. The Sicilian expedition was like watching a slow-motion train wreck unfold in real time. Athens underestimated the opposition, misjudged the terrain, and overextended their reach. It was a case study in hubris pride before the fall with a side of calamity. The Athenian forces were decimated, their fleet obliterated, leaving them to retreat home with their tails between their legs. The economic and political costs of the Sicilian disaster were staggering. Athens' treasury was bled dry, their once mighty navy reduced to a shadow of its former glory. The political fallout was equally catastrophic, as finger-pointing and blame games tore through the Athenian assembly like a storm. Democracy, once the crowning jewel of Athens, faltered under the weight of defeat and desperation. And yet, for all its flaws and follies, Athens's naval legacy remains a testament to human ambition. They dared to dream big, to reach for the horizon even when the odds were stacked against them. Their triremes were more than just ships. They were symbols of a city that defied convention, that embraced innovation and change with open arms. The story of Athens is one of triumphs and tragedies, of a people who rode the waves of history with courage and conviction. As we sail onward in our exploration of ancient naval mastery, remember, history is not just a collection of dates and battles. It's the story of people striving, failing, and sometimes, just sometimes, succeeding in ways that echo through the ages. So stay tuned, because the tides of history are ever-changing, and there are more waves to ride in this tale of Athens and the sea. The Greek story of naval grandeur sails into choppy waters as we approach the decline of Athenian dominance. It's a tale as ancient as time. The mighty inevitably fall, especially when Rome isn't built in a day, and ancient Athens wasn't built to last forever. The triremes, once the pride of the Athenian navy, began to feel less like the cutting-edge tech they were, and more like that old smartphone you can't update anymore, still functional, but not quite up to speed with the times. The Athenian navy stumbled into the 4th century BCE like a rock star past its prime, still trying to headline in a world rapidly changing its musical tastes. You see, Athens's maritime mastery was all well and good when the Greeks were the big fish in a small pond, but enter Philip II of Macedon, and suddenly that pond felt a whole lot bigger. With Philip, we're looking at a guy who took one glance at the Athenian playbook and decided to rewrite the rules. He wasn't content to be just another player in the Greek theatre. He was the guy who tore down the set and built a new stage. While Athens was busy patching up its tired triremes, Philip was assembling a land-based juggernaut that made even the most seasoned seafarers pause. Philip's rise was less about naval battles and more about leveraging the power of a united Macedonia. He was a man of vision, seeing conquest not just in terms of territory, but in the ability to wield influence like a puppeteer with an army of marionettes. His combination of diplomacy, military innovation, and sheer tenacity transformed Macedonia from backwater to powerhouse. It's like watching a B-list actor suddenly snag an Oscar-worthy role. Everyone was forced to sit up and take notice. Now, Macedonia wasn't exactly a coastal kingdom, but Philip understood the value of naval power. He didn't just want to control the land, he wanted to command the seas as well. So, he began incorporating naval elements into his grand strategy. Sure, he wasn't about to outshine the Athenian navy with their sleek triremes, but he didn't need to. Philip was playing a different game, one where the board stretched over mountains and plains rather than just along the coastline. Let's talk economic realities. While Athens had been swimming in silver talents, Macedonia was busy investing its resources wisely. Philip took a page out of the Athenian playbook but flipped it. Instead of focusing on expensive fleets, he put his money into developing a professional army that could march further and fight longer than any before. His cavalry became the stuff of legend, a formidable force that could turn the tide of battle faster than you could say, pass the feta. The shift from Athenian naval dominance to Macedonian land power was as much about technological evolution as it was about strategic genius. Philip understood that the way to rule wasn't through the sheer size of your fleet, but the versatility of your forces. His army was like a well-oiled machine, adaptable and relentless, able to take on anything from city sieges to pitched battles. But Philip's story, much like a good Greek tragedy, was just the beginning. Enter Alexander the Great, Philip's son, protégé, and eventual successor. If Philip was the opening act, Alexander was the headliner. He took his father's vision and ran with it, literally, across Asia. Alexander understood the value of naval power, but he didn't let it overshadow his land campaigns. Instead, he used it as a complementary force, a tool in his ever-expanding arsenal. His campaigns were epic in scale, stretching from Greece to the edges of India. He was like a maestro conducting a symphony of war, each battle a movement, each victory a crescendo. Naval strategies evolved under Alexander, becoming less about grand naval battles and more about supporting his land-based conquests. He utilized his navy to secure supply lines, transport troops, and project power across the Mediterranean. It wasn't about having the biggest fleet, it was about having the right fleet for the job. Alexander's approach was like opting for a Swiss Army knife instead of a broadsword versatility over brute force. The reality of naval warfare in Alexander's time was that the once glamorous triremes were becoming relics. The world was changing, and so too were the tools of war. The Greeks learned a valuable lesson. Bigger isn't always better, and sometimes the best way to win a war is not just by dominating the seas, but by mastering the land. As the dust settled on Alexander's conquests, the Greek world found itself transformed. The era of the trireme had passed, overshadowed by the tactical brilliance of land campaigns and the rise of Macedonian might. Yet, the Greeks had left an indelible mark on naval warfare, their innovations and strategies echoing through history like the distant roar of the ocean against the cliffs. So, as we pause in our journey through the annals of ancient naval mastery, remember, the Greeks may have learned their lessons the hard way, but their legacy lives on. They showed the world that true power isn't just about the size of your forces, but how you wield them. And as we look to the horizon for the next wave of history, there's no doubt that the Greeks will continue to inspire, challenge, and remind us of the enduring power of human ingenuity. As the currents of history shifted, the Greek legacy of naval innovation didn't just wash away like sandcastles at high tide. Oh no, it left a mark, a barnacle-encrusted testament to human ingenuity that even the Romans couldn't ignore. The Romans, those notorious empire builders, might have had a reputation for road building and toga wearing, but when it came to naval warfare, they took copious notes from the Greeks. It's like the Romans were the diligent students in the back of the class, furiously scribbling down every detail of the Greek syllabus on trireme construction and sea dominance. By the time Rome was flexing its imperial muscles, the Mediterranean had already been transformed into a bustling maritime freeway. And while the Romans were busy conquering land faster than you can say vini, vidi, vici, they quickly realized that to control the Mediterranean, they'd need more than just legions marching on land. Enter the Roman navy, a force that, while initially clumsy and inexperienced, was determined to become a seafaring powerhouse. It was like watching a landlubber learn to surf, awkward at first, but eventually, they caught the wave. The Romans took the Greek trireme concept and ran with it, or rather rode with it. They upgraded the design, adding their own twists like the corvus, a boarding device that turned sea battles into floating land battles, perfect for their infantry-centric military machine. This innovation was crucial in their victory at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE during the First Punic War, where they faced off against the experienced Carthaginian fleet. The corvus allowed Roman soldiers to do what they did best, fight hand to hand, turning the tide in their favour. It was like giving a gladiator a new weapon and watching them dominate the arena. Speaking of arenas, the economic implications of maintaining such a navy were as vast as the sea itself. The Romans poured resources into their fleets, understanding that each ship was a floating investment capable of yielding territorial and economic dividends. They built shipyards with assembly line efficiency, cranking out warships faster than you could say Carthago delenda est. The cost of building and maintaining a fleet was immense, but the Romans were playing a long game. Control of the sea lanes meant control of trade, and trade meant wealth, a fact the Greeks had known all too well. Yet, for all the innovations and successes, the romantic image of naval warfare often glosses over the gritty reality. Life at sea was no sun-soaked paradise. Roman sailors, like their Greek predecessors, faced cramped conditions, limited rations, and the constant threat of storms and sea battles. It was a life of hardship and discipline, more akin to a soldier's march than a sailor's cruise. The stories of adventure and heroism often overshadowed the daily grind of life on board, where disease and monotony were just as formidable foes as any enemy fleet. The influence of Greek naval mastery didn't just stop at the Romans. It rippled outward, inspiring maritime empires for centuries to come. The Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman successor state, continued to innovate with the Greek fire, a fearsome weapon that spewed flames across the water, terrifying enemies and securing their naval dominance for centuries. It was a deadly cocktail of chemistry and engineering that made the Byzantines the pyrotechnicians of the Mediterranean. Fast forward to the age of exploration, and you can still sense the echoes of Greek innovation as European powers like Spain and Portugal began charting the oceans in their quest for new worlds. These seafaring nations owed a debt to the ancient Greeks, who had laid the groundwork for maritime exploration with their daring voyages and unyielding spirit. The Greeks had shown that the sea wasn't just a barrier, but a bridge, a pathway to discovery and conquest. But let's not get too misty-eyed about these seafaring pioneers. The romanticized tales often overshadow the harsh truth. Naval warfare was a brutal business. Ships were not just vessels of exploration, they were instruments of war, commerce, and domination. The Greeks understood this duality, weaving tales of heroism and adventure while grappling with the cold, hard realities of maritime conflict. So, as we draw the sails on this voyage through the annals of ancient naval mastery, what lessons can we glean from the Greeks? For one, they taught us that true power lies not just in strength, but in intelligence and adaptability. They showed us that the sea, with all its unpredictability, could be tamed by those willing to innovate and take risks. Their legacy is a reminder that behind every great story of adventure and conquest, there's a foundation of grit, determination, and, yes, a little bit of luck. In the end, the Greeks didn't just give us the trireme or the tales of Odysseus. They bequeathed a legacy of exploration and ambition that continues to inspire. Their influence is felt not just in the history books, but in the very fabric of maritime tradition, a testament to a people who dared to challenge the horizon and, in doing so, changed the course of history. So next time you find yourself gazing at the ocean, remember the ancient Greeks, the original wave riders who turned the Mediterranean into their playground and left a legacy as enduring as the sea itself. If you ever thought the Druids were just a bunch of robe-wearing, mistletoe-picking mystics wandering around ancient forests, well, buckle up. The reality of ancient Druids is a tad more intricate than your average Celtic fantasy flick would have you believe. Picture this. Around 2,000 years ago, these folks were the intellectual elite of the Celtic tribes spanning regions from modern-day Ireland to the edges of Eastern Europe. They were the philosophers, judges, doctors, and, yes, occasionally the guys with the crazy bonfires, but not quite in the way you'd think. Let's dive into the world of these enigmatic figures who managed to keep a tight lid on their secrets for centuries. until the Romans came along with their pens and penchant for documentation. The Druids weren't just conjuring up spells from the shadows. They were the glue holding society together, playing the roles of priests, teachers, and legal authorities. It's kind of like if your local librarian, judge, and spiritual guru were all rolled into one. The tribe looked to them for guidance on everything from religious rituals to legal disputes. Talk about job security. Pliny the Elder, that Roman naturalist who had a knack for writing everything down, mentioned the Druids in his works. He described them as being so revered that even the kings wouldn't dare cross them. Imagine if every political decision had to pass through a council of Gandalf lookalikes. It's like the ultimate, because I said so, authority, but with a lot more gravitas. Now, why all the mystery? The Druids weren't just being dramatic. Their secrecy was a strategic move. By keeping their knowledge and rituals under wraps, they maintained a mystical aura that kept them at the top of the social food chain. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a magician never revealing their tricks. But their secrecy wasn't just about maintaining power, it was also practical. In a world where oral tradition was king, keeping things hush-hush ensured that their teachings were preserved and passed down accurately without the risk of a game of historical telephone. Speaking of oral tradition, the Druids were masters of memorization. They didn't scribble down notes or carry around scrolls. Nope, they kept everything in their heads, from the laws and customs of the tribe to the songs and stories that captured their history. It was said that it could take up to 20 years to become a full-fledged Druid. 20 years of memorizing, debating, and possibly perfecting the art of the enigmatic nod. Meanwhile, us mere mortals struggle to remember where we left our keys. The Druids' knowledge wasn't just limited to spiritual matters. They were also keen astronomers and scientists. Their understanding of the natural world was, for the time, quite sophisticated. They tracked celestial movements and were believed to have used this knowledge to mark the seasons and predict natural events. It's like having a personal calendar app, minus the notifications, integrated into the community. This understanding of the cosmos only added to their mystique, making them seem like they had a direct line to the gods. But let's not sugarcoat things too much. While the Druids were certainly impressive, they weren't exactly living in a utopia of harmony and peace. The ancient world was a place of constant tribal warfare, and the Druids were smack dab in the middle of it. Their role as peacemakers and judges was crucial, but they were also known to encourage and even orchestrate wars when it suited the tribe's needs. It's a reminder that even the most mystical of societies had their fair share of political maneuvering. And then there's the little matter of human sacrifice. Yep, you heard that right. While it's easy to get caught up in the romantic image of the Druids as wise sages, we can't ignore the darker aspects. Julius Caesar, who had a vested interest in painting the Celts as barbaric since he was, after all, conquering them, wrote about the Druids performing human sacrifices. Archaeological evidence supports the notion that such rituals occurred, albeit possibly less frequently than Caesar claimed. Think of it as ancient propaganda? Look at them. They're so uncivilized. Meanwhile, the Romans were busy with their own forms of brutality. Yet the Druids were undeniably influential. Their power was such that the Romans, upon invading Celtic lands, sought to diminish it. The Romans were all about assimilation, and independent, influential Druids didn't quite fit their model of order. So began a campaign to wipe out their practices, a cultural erasure that eventually pushed these enigmatic figures into the realm of legend and myth. The Druids' legacy lives on in the cultural memory of Europe, from tales of Merlin to modern-day Druidic revivals. Their true nature, somewhere between the wisdom of Yoda and the pragmatism of a medieval lawyer, continues to captivate our imaginations. They remind us of a time when history was sung, the stars were a calendar, and the lines between magic and science were just a bit more blurred. And isn't that what makes the past just a little more intriguing? It's not just the facts, but the stories, the myths, and the mysteries that keep us coming back for more. So, speaking of the Druids' legendary status, let's unravel some of those intricate rituals that kept them at the heart of ancient Celtic life. First things first, forget about those Hollywood Druidic gatherings under a full moon with everyone chanting in unison. Real-life Druid ceremonies were more of a social event. Imagine a community fair but with more feathers and fewer funnel cakes. One of their most significant rituals was the Festival of Samhain, marking the end of the harvest season and the onset of winter. This wasn't just about spooks and spirits, although it's easy to see how those traditions evolved. Samhain was an economic pivot point, a time when cattle were slaughtered and stored for the cold months, and when debts were settled. In a world without refrigeration or credit cards, these were serious business decisions. Think of it as fiscal year-end for the ancient Celts, wrapped in a cloak of superstition. The Druids, acting as the spiritual accountants, oversaw these transitions. They ensured that the sacrifices, both animal and occasionally human, were conducted properly. These rituals were believed to appease the gods and protect the tribe through the harsh winter. It's a bit like paying your insurance premium, only with more chanting and less paperwork. But the Druids weren't just checking boxes, they were reinforcing the social hierarchy. By controlling these ceremonies, they maintained their position as the indispensable middlemen between humans and the divine. Now let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the Wicker Man. Thanks to sensational stories from Roman writers like Julius Caesar, there's this enduring image of Druids burning people alive in giant wooden effigies. While there's some archaeological evidence of sacrificial practices, the Wicker Man story might be more fiction than fact. Picture Caesar, pen in hand, thinking, how can I make these guys sound like total savages? It's Propaganda 101, folks. That's not to say the Druids were all peace and love. Sacrificial rituals, whether exaggerated or not, were part of a broader strategy of maintaining social order. These acts, grim as they were, demonstrated the power of the Druids and reinforced their role as the arbiters of fate. It's a case of do as I say or else. And let's be honest, fear is a pretty effective management tool. Just ask any medieval monarch. Beyond the smoke and bonfires, Druidic rituals also played a crucial role in the agricultural calendar. The festival of Beltane, for instance, was all about fertility and protection. Taking place on May 1st, it involved lighting bonfires, dancing, and driving cattle between the flames. This wasn't just for show, it was believed to purify the livestock and ensure a bountiful season. Think of it as the ancient precursor to spring cleaning, but with more livestock and less dusting. Economically, these rituals were the glue holding the community together. They provided a framework for the agrarian economy, dictating when to plant, harvest, and prepare for the year ahead. The Druids, with their astronomical insights, were like the farmer's almanac of their time only, without the snappy weather predictions. Speaking of celestial observations, the Druids' knowledge of the stars was key to their ritual calendar. Their understanding of the lunar and solar cycles allowed them to predict eclipses and other astronomical events, which they used to time their most important ceremonies. It's like having a calendar app that not only tells you the date, but also predicts the best time to throw a killer party. This celestial savvy only added to their mystique, making it seem like they had a direct line to the cosmos. But let's not be fooled into thinking the Druids were purely benevolent sky watchers. Their control over these rituals was also a form of social manipulation. By dictating when and how these ceremonies occurred, they reinforced their dominance over the tribe. It's a classic case of knowledge is power, and the Druids were the gatekeepers of that knowledge. Now, while we're busting myths, let's tackle the idea of Druidic magic. The popular image of Druids as spellcasters brewing potions in bubbling cauldrons is more fantasy than fact. Their magic was more about using natural remedies and understanding the environment. They knew which herbs cured ailments and which ones could knock you out faster than a Roman chariot. It's not exactly Hogwarts, but it's still pretty impressive for a time without Google. This practical magic was part of what kept the Druids at the centre of Celtic life. They were the doctors and pharmacists, using their knowledge of plants and the natural world to heal and sometimes harm. In an age when a common cold could be a death sentence, having a Druid in the village was like having a walking, talking pharmacy. So, while the image of a Druid waving a wand might be alluring, the reality was much more grounded. They were the scientists of their day, using their understanding of the natural world to maintain their power and influence. It's a reminder that sometimes the most magical things are just a matter of perspective and a solid grasp of herbal medicine. In summary, the rituals and ceremonies of the Druids were complex tapestries woven with threads of economic necessity, social control, and a dash of genuine wonder. They were the social architects of their time, using their knowledge and charisma to hold sway over their communities. Whether through the sacred flames of Beltane or the celestial calculations of Samhain, the Druids were masters of ceremony, ensuring their place at the heart of Celtic society. And as we'll see in the next part of our journey, Their influence reached even further than the borders of their own tribes into the very fabric of European history. Stay tuned. Now, let's dive deeper into the Druids' political clout, because these guys weren't just hanging around the Stonehenge equivalent of water coolers discussing moon phases. No, they were neck-deep in the nitty-gritty of tribal politics. When you think about it, the Druids were the ancient world's answer to the modern-day political consultant, minus the spin doctors and Twitter wars. They were the wise, bearded middlemen who shaped policy and mediated conflicts with a finesse that would make even the most seasoned diplomat raise an eyebrow. First off, let's talk power dynamics. The Druids held a position of influence that was both spiritual and secular. They were the ultimate mediators, called upon to settle squabbles that could range from petty disputes over livestock to full-blown tribal warfare. And here's the kicker, their decisions were binding, no appeals court needed. Imagine having the authority to tell a chieftain to take a hike or halt a brewing war with just a tilt of your head. That's some serious clout. Their role as peacekeepers wasn't just about keeping the peace, though. It was about maintaining the social order. In a world where the line between survival and chaos was razor thin, the Druids were the ones who ensured the scales tipped in favour of stability. They were the judges and juries deciding who got what and why. Their decisions were respected not because everyone agreed with them, but because everyone knew it was in their best interest to play ball. Now, how did the Druids garner such respect and authority? It wasn't just their knowledge of the stars or their herbal remedies, it was their ability to weave a narrative that positioned them as the gatekeepers of fate. They had this knack for making the mundane seem mystical, for turning simple observations into grand prophecies. It's like when someone reads your horoscope and suddenly your bad day makes sense. The Druids were the original horoscope writers, spinning tales that kept everyone enthralled and, more importantly, compliant. But let's not forget, the Druids were also pragmatic. They were aware that to maintain their authority, they needed to be seen as both impartial and benevolent. Their power wasn't just about the ability to call the shots, but also about the perception of fairness. They couldn't just throw down decrees like ancient-day Twitter rants, they had to ensure that their decisions made sense to the tribes. After all, an uprising wasn't just inconvenient, it was deadly. And here's where the myth of supernatural foresight comes in. The Druids were often credited with seeing the future, predicting events with eerie precision. But let's get real. Their so-called prophecies were more like educated guesses based on years of observation and experience. They were the data analysts of their time, albeit with a bit more flair and a lot more feathers. They observed patterns, understood human nature, and made predictions that were more about probability than premonition. That's not to say they didn't have their moments of mystique. They knew how to work a crowd, to make their predictions sound like divine whispers rather than the logical deductions they were. It's a bit like a magician revealing the card you were thinking of, only the real trick was in the setup, not the reveal. The Druids were masters of the setup, ensuring that their every word was draped in enough mystery to leave everyone in awe. Their political influence extended beyond just conflict resolution. In shaping policy, they used their knowledge to direct the course of tribal development. Think of them as the early architects of social policy, using their understanding of the natural and human worlds to advise on everything from agricultural practices to legal reforms. It was their ability to blend practicality with spirituality that made them indispensable. But let's not pretend it was all kumbaya and community gatherings. The Druids were also adept at playing tribes against each other when it suited their purposes. If a bit of conflict ensured their position remained secure, they weren't above letting tensions simmer. It's power politics at its finest. Sometimes the threat of chaos can be more effective than chaos itself. Economically, their influence was also profound. By controlling the timing of important festivals and ceremonies, they indirectly dictated when and how resources were used. They were the ancient equivalent of a fiscal policy committee, deciding when to tighten the belt and when to let loose. Their insights into the natural world provided the foundation for economic stability, ensuring that the tribe's resources were used wisely. But let's keep our feet on the ground for a moment. While the Druids were undoubtedly influential, they were also products of their time. They wielded their power not just through wisdom, but through the fear and superstition of the people they led. Their authority was a delicate balance of respect and intimidation, and they were acutely aware that one misstep could send it all tumbling down. In summary, the Druids were more than just mystical figures draped in robes. They were the political heavyweights of their era, pulling the strings behind the scenes and shaping the destiny of their people with an artful blend of wisdom and showmanship. They walked the fine line between revered sages and shrewd power brokers, ensuring that they remained at the heart of Celtic life and politics. As we continue our exploration, we'll see how this intricate dance of influence played out in the broader tapestry of European history. Stay tuned for more revelations on how these ancient figures left their mark on the world. And speaking of leaving their mark, let's talk about the Romans crashing the Druid party. If you thought the Celts were just minding their own business with their lunar calendars and herbal brews, think again. Enter the Romans, the empire with a serious case of expansionist FOMO. They saw the Celtic lands not as a mystical realm of wise old men and sacred groves, but as prime real estate for the next outpost of Roman civilization. So around 55 BCE, Julius Caesar, the Roman poster boy for conquest, decided to give the Druids a run for their gold-plated talks. And let's be clear, Caesar didn't just wake up one morning thinking, you know what? I could really go for some mistletoe and mead right now. No, he had strategic motives, land, resources, and the ever-popular glory. Plus, conquering the Celts would be a nice feather in his laurel wreath, a way to cement his legacy as the ultimate Roman overachiever. Now, to the Romans, the Druids were more than just a curiosity. They were a potential threat. Why? Because they were the glue holding the Celtic tribes together. The Druids were the ones with the charisma and influence to unite the tribes against a common enemy. And let's be honest, the Romans weren't exactly into the whole unity thing, unless it was under their own banner. So, what better way to destabilize a culture than to undermine its spiritual and intellectual leaders? The Romans had a knack for cultural assimilation, and they were masters at turning local customs into novelties for Roman amusement. But the Druids, they were a tough nut to crack. They weren't just going to swap their oak groves for Roman temples and call it a day. The Romans saw the Druids' secretive nature and oral traditions as both a challenge and an opportunity. After all, if you can't read your enemy's playbook, you might as well write your own. So, they painted the Druids as barbaric, emphasizing those good old human sacrifices to justify their conquest. But here's the kicker. While the Romans were busy scribbling down tales of wicker men and bloody rituals, they were also quietly impressed by the Druids' scientific knowledge and their role as social stabilizers. The Romans were nothing if not pragmatic, and they knew that some Druidic practices could actually bolster their governance. So while they were stamping out the more uncivilized aspects, they were also cherry-picking the bits that could be adapted into Roman society. It's like throwing out the band but keeping the catchy tunes. Economically, the Roman conquest was both a boon and a bane for the Celtic tribes. On the one hand, the Romans brought infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, and all the trappings of a bustling economy. Trade routes opened up, and with them came new goods and ideas. On the other hand, the Celts were now subject to Roman taxes, and let's just say the Romans weren't shy about collecting. The Druids, who had once been the tax code incarnate, deciding who owed what to whom, found their influence waning as Roman bureaucrats took over. It was like going from being the head of the IRS to a tax collector in a small village. The decline of Druidic influence was a slow burn, not an immediate bonfire. The Druids tried to adapt, some even integrating into Roman society as teachers and advisors. After all, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em, and maybe teach them a thing or two about herbal remedies while you're at it. But make no mistake, the core of their power, the ability to dictate the spiritual and political life of the tribes, was eroding. Now, let's debunk the myth of the Druids as mere victims in this tale of Roman conquest. Sure, they faced oppression, and yes, their sacred groves were often cut down in the name of progress or firewood. But they weren't just passive players in their own story. Some Druids actively resisted Roman rule, participating in uprisings and even inciting rebellions. They were strategic thinkers who knew that their real power lay in their ability to influence the hearts and minds of the people. They didn't just roll over, they adapted, resisted, and, in some cases, thrived under the new regime, albeit in altered forms. The Roman view of the Druids was complex, a blend of fear, respect, and disdain. To the Romans, the Druids were both barbaric mystics and skilled negotiators. It's like meeting someone who can make a mean cup of coffee while simultaneously convincing you to buy a timeshare. You might not trust them, but you can't help but be a little impressed. But let's not romanticize too much here. The Roman conquest was brutal, and it left a lasting scar on Druidic practices. Many traditions were lost or transformed beyond recognition. The Druids who survived did so by adapting to the new order, blending their ancient wisdom with Roman ways. Some even found new roles as advisors to Roman officials, bridging the gap between ancient Celtic knowledge and Roman practicality. Others faded into the mists of time, their secrets dying with them, leaving behind only tantalizing glimpses of their once great influence. In the grand tapestry of history, the Roman conquest was a turning point for the Druids. It marked the decline of their traditional roles, but also their transformation into figures of myth and legend. They became symbols of resistance and resilience, their stories woven into the cultural fabric of Europe. The Druids were not just relics of a bygone age, but catalysts for change, their legacy echoing through the centuries. And as we pull back the curtain on this chapter of history, let's remember that the Druids were not just victims of Roman aggression, but active participants in their own story. They navigated the turbulent waters of change with a mix of wisdom, tenacity, and a dash of that old Celtic charm. So while the Romans may have conquered their lands, they could never fully erase the legacy of the Druids, a legacy that continues to captivate us to this day. Stay tuned as we explore how the echoes of Druidic influence resounded through the ages, shaping the medieval world and leaving a lasting imprint on European culture. The story's not over yet, and the Druids still have a few more tricks up their sleeves. As we roll out the red carpet into the present, the echoes of Druidic influence still hum beneath the surface of our modern world. From the ashes of Roman conquest, the legend of the Druids spiraled into the ether of European folklore, casting a long shadow over centuries of cultural evolution. The Druids, those enigmatic figures who once walked the forests with a dignity that demanded both reverence and caution, have now morphed into a symbol of mystery and magic. Fast forward to the 18th century, and you'll find the Druids being dusted off like an old vinyl record, rediscovered by the romantics of the Enlightenment era. This was a time when people were just itching to romanticize anything that whispered of a pre-industrial past. Enter the Druid revival, a movement that, much like a phoenix, sprang from the ashes of historical obscurity. This revival wasn't just about donning robes and parading around Stonehenge, it was a cultural phenomenon. The Druids became a canvas onto which people projected their longing for a simpler, purer connection to nature. Now, let's not get too carried away with this bucolic vision. The Druid revival was as much about political identity as it was about spiritual awakening. In Britain, for instance, the revival coincided with a burgeoning interest in national identity and heritage. The Druids, with their ancient Celtic roots, became poster children for a pre-Saxon British identity. They were repackaged not just as mystical sages, but as proto-nationalists, standing as a symbol of a proud, unconquered past. It's like turning a historical footnote into a blockbuster with a killer soundtrack and sweeping vistas. As the 20th century rolled around, Druidism found itself yet again in the spotlight, this time with a more esoteric twist. Modern Druidic organizations began to spring up, each with its own interpretation of what it meant to be a Druid in a world of skyscrapers and smartphones. Groups like the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, OBOD, founded in 1964, started to formalize what was essentially an eclectic tradition. They crafted rituals and doctrines that drew from ancient lore, but with a distinctly modern flavor. These modern Druids aren't just about ritual and robes, though. They're environmentalists and activists, champions of ecological balance and protectors of the natural world. In a sense, they've become the eco-warriors of the spiritual world, advocating for a lifestyle that respects the earth and its cycles. It's a role that would probably make their ancient counterparts nod in approval, minus the human sacrifices, of course. But let's not pretend it's all sunshine and daisies. The romanticization of the Druids does come with its own set of myths and misconceptions. The image of Druids as all-knowing, nature-loving sages tends to gloss over the harsher realities of their historical counterparts. The ancient Druids were as much about political power and social control as they were about spirituality. Their rituals, often steeped in superstition, were as much about enforcing social norms as they were about connecting with the divine. It's a reminder that every legend has its shadows and every myth its teeth. Yet there's an undeniable allure to the Druidic image. Perhaps it's the mystery of a group that left no written records, or the allure of a time when magic and science were two sides of the same coin. Whatever the reason, the Druids continue to captivate our collective imagination. They represent a bridge between the known and the unknown, a tantalizing glimpse into a world where the lines between reality and myth blur into a tapestry of wonder. In contemporary culture, the Druids have found a home in literature, film, and even music. From the pages of fantasy novels to the lyrics of folk songs, their image has been co-opted and reimagined time and again. They're the wise mentors in epic tales, the mysterious figures in the background of historical dramas, a testament to their enduring appeal. But beyond the romanticized image lies the true legacy of the Druids, their profound understanding of the world around them and their ability to adapt and survive through the ages. They remind us that knowledge and tradition, while often rooted in the past, are not static. They evolve, shape-shift, and find new life in the most unexpected of places. As we wrap up our journey through the annals of Druidic history, let's reflect on what this tells us about human nature. Our fascination with the Druids is a mirror reflecting our own desires for wisdom, connection, and meaning. It underscores a fundamental truth about history, that the stories we tell, the myths we build, are not just about the past, but about who we are and who we aspire to be. Whether seen as sages or shamans, the Druids have left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape. Their legacy is not just in the myths they inspired or the rituals they performed, but in the very way we perceive the world. They remind us that history is not just a sequence of events, but a rich tapestry of stories woven with threads of truth and imagination. So, as you drift off to sleep, pondering the mysteries of the ancients, consider this. The Druids, enigmatic and elusive, have shown us that the past is never truly past. It lives on in our stories, our dreams, and our unending quest for understanding. And isn't that the real magic?